All right, episode number 3 coming up with Brian Edwards of Rocklands Entertainment. Really great friend of mine. We do a lot of touring together. And Brian got started at a very young age, 17, when he was booking his first shows. And this episode talks about his beginnings and some of the great acts he's worked with over the years, including some great Canadian artists, Tommy Hunter, Stompin Tom Connors. And we talk about his beginning with Kitty Wells from the Grand Ole Opry. So lots of great stories, and I think we'll do a part 2 in the fall when we're out on the road and continue on with even more great stories that I know he has. So hope you enjoy this one. It's a great, great listen. All right. Starting podcast number 3. I'm very excited to have my very good friend, Mr. Brian Edwards from Rocklands Entertainment. And we've known each other for a very, very long time.
Oh, boy.
How many years do you think? It goes back to at least, I must have been early teens, like 12, 13, 14.
I would say it's probably mid-80s anyway, so it's probably, very much 30, 33, 34, 35 years maybe. It's been quite a while.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Absolutely. It sure does. And thank God we're still having fun.
I know. That's the whole thing of it, right?
Absolutely.
So I figured this would be a really great way for everyone to kind of, what I like with this podcast is kind of going back to the beginning and learning a little bit about where you started and where you came from and how you got there. And so now I know you live in Peterborough now, obviously. Were you born in Peterborough?
I was actually born on my grandmother's table in a little town called Cordova Mines, Ontario, which has a population of about 35 people, just a little east of Peterborough. So it was kind of, of course, I can't remember the experience, but I certainly remember hearing about it. And it was probably one of those things where the country doctor delivered every baby in those days, and I happened to be one of them, and I didn't make it to the hospital.
Wow.
Yeah.
You don't hear that very often.
I was trying to tell some relatives of mine the other day about that, and they couldn't believe it till they checked it out. And I told them who the doctor was because I had the all the information that they provide when the baby was born. And they said, well, that was the guy that was doing it. And I said, well, that was him.
Wow. What kind of table was it?
A good old kitchen table. One of those ones right beside the wood stove.
That's good.
Yeah, it was. It was a good country upbringing, which I think, as you can attest to that, there's nothing wrong with that.
No. I think it's really solid. I think it's kind of unusual for people to talk about growing up in the country now. When you talk to people, they don't quite get it.
Well, I think, if somebody says to you, what kind of started you or this or whatever you're doing, and I think, my grandfather was a square dance caller back in his day, and those are the days they had no microphones or anything. They just stood in the middle of the hall, and just the fiddle player stood there, and away they went.
Yeah.
So I was always fascinated by that because my dad became a square dance caller too. And one thing led to another. And, when we lived in Peterborough, my mom and dad were there. He drove transport truck too, as well as calling square dances. And they'd go out and work with these different local bands all the time. And of course, they'd end up back at our house.
Yeah.
Well, over the years, a lot of people ended up at our house, including a guy that I ended up working with for 25 years by the name of Stompin Tom. I mean, the Peterborough roots came through, and I was always fascinated by music. I used to sing at the corner store for a nickel. I used to sing the old song, I Don't Want to Play House. And I still see the guy around town. He's a wonderful lacrosse player. He's in the lacrosse Hall of Fame. Yeah. And he said to me, one of these days you got to come and sing me that song again. I've got a few nickels in my pocket. And I said, well, don't be surprised. I might just do that. So I guess if you want to say what kind of maybe triggered a few things, that kind of was the first interest I ever had. I mean, we had the music around the house. I liked it. My dad was calling square dances, which I had no interest in because not only could I not call it square dance, but I couldn't square dance either. And you can't do one without the other. Yeah. So you just decide that's not right. But I always found it kind of interesting, and it was fun because I knew the country music thing like there was no tomorrow. I was basically weaned on it. I mean, that's what we did. I mean,
Yeah.
if it was at my grandmother's house or somebody's house, there was a guitar and a fiddle or something around. And I even took guitar lessons several times. It never amounted to anything, but I certainly had that
I was just going to ask you that. Did you ever play
Oh,
a musical instrument at all?
well, I've still got the guitar in the basement, and I still every once in a while pick it up and say I can still do C, D, E, and F and all that sort of stuff. So I can still do a few things, but nothing to get excited about.
Is there, I always wanted to ask you this, if there's an instrument, because you work so much behind the scenes with all of these entertainers and seeing all these shows, is there something that you've always thought in the back of your mind, I wish I could be that guitar player or that drummer, or probably not a drummer, but
You're right there. God bless them. No, as much as I wanted to do that, there was a reason it wasn't clicking.
Yeah.
I tried and I would do everything I could. And, I'd go to these guitar lessons and they'd have so much patience with me. And I know deep down inside, they really wanted to say, look,
yeah,
that's $5 a week you're paying me. You'd far better off go out and buy something else with it because it isn't going anywhere. So I tried it 2 or 3 times. I even got an electric guitar once. I thought, that's the problem. I need an electric guitar. I need to be able to turn this thing up, fixes everything right up, turn it up, and away I go. But I just couldn't get into it. And I thought, whatever I end up doing, if anything, which in those days I didn't know the first thing about what a music industry even was, let alone being part of it.
Yeah.
I just, thought, no, whatever I'm going to do, this is not going to be it. And which was fine. I kind of came to the conclusion that I wasn't going to be a musician and kind of let it go with that. And
it's either in you or it's not in you.
yeah, that's exactly right.
Yes.
I tell you one thing, I certainly have a lot of respect and a lot of jealousy sometimes to see people be able to pick up an instrument and do it by ear and all. I shouldn't say the word jealousy, but it is when you're a kid, you want to play like everybody else, obviously. And when you can see them pick these things up by ear, it just blows me away. Some of these artists I've worked with over the years, say, well, play me the song once and I'll play it right back to you. And they can, and it's just amazing.
Yeah,
I like that.
I still run into a lot of people where I'm amazed at their talent, even though I'm a player myself and can do a lot of those things. But there's some people who are just uber talented that you just can't believe how good they are.
Well, when you work with people like Graham Townsend or Frank Mills or any of these people, they probably couldn't read a note of music if they tried, but they're probably some of the best musicians in the world.
Yeah.
And it's all by ear. And I think that's, I just think that's a real God-given talent, and I have a lot of respect for it. Matter of fact, I worked with a lot of situations, I'm sure you have over the years, where you put a chart in front of somebody, and if you ever have to improvise or move the chart, they're in big trouble because they can't do anything but a chart.
Yeah, because you get so used to staring at it.
Exactly.
You move it away.
And they're done.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I was working with a group, and the piano player, their music blew off the stand, and they were playing music that they've played for years and years and years over and over and over again. And they were lost. They couldn't play it, even though they probably played the song 1,000 times.
Exactly.
And just couldn't do it.
Well, somebody told me one time, and not that I didn't know this, I wouldn't know how to read a chart either, but they often told me that if you can feel the music and play it by ear, it becomes across a lot more natural and a lot better. So I don't know, I've seen a lot of symphony orchestra up there, and they always looked a little uptight to me, and I kind of wonder if they took the charts away, maybe they'd be a lot better. I don't know. I mean, not saying they're not a good musician, but they don't look as relaxed as, some of the Nashville players and those guys that just do this stuff in their sleep.
I always memorized all my stuff. I remember being in high school in the high school band, and we always used to have what they call a stand partner. So you'd share music with the person next to you, and the girl next to me, she always used to carry the music, and usually after a few times playing, I find myself just not even looking at it anymore because that's how I learned when I was young. Just you memorize it and then you've got it. Well, we were doing this little concert at some school somewhere, and she didn't show up, so I had no music. And I'm right in the front section of this stage band and playing the saxophone, and the teacher came up and he just looks at me and says, "Where's your music?" I was like, I don't have him. A stand partner has it. He says, "Well, what are you going to do?" I was like, I know it. I have no problem. I know it all. And he just gave me the look of death. And he sat there for every song. I know he was looking at his music, and just all he did is stare at me, and I knew every single song and I knew every single note, and he never said a word to me after that. But yeah, he was mad, but I memorized it. But that's how I grew up learning how to do it.
Well, it kind of reminds me of working with Graham Townsend over the years. I remember them saying, they'd call him Greyhound. It was one take Graham. He'd go in and say, play me that song, and they'd play it, and he'd do his part and go home. And they'd say, how can he do that? Well, one of the problems in his particular case, he was legally blind, but on top of that, he had a wonderful ear that could do that. And a lot of people can memorize it or play it by ear. And I think I just think I had a piano player one time that I wanted to work this tour we were doing with the Von Trapp children.
Yeah.
And he had all these charts to read, and he couldn't do that. And he was a by ear player.
Yeah.
And he got so uptight having to read these charts. He says, well, take the charts away and play it the way you know it.
Yeah.
He says, but I can't. And I said, why? Because he said, I don't know that music. I can't do that. And I said, well, let them sing it for you and you play it. He said, well, I don't play by ear like that. And I thought, I didn't know there was a selected play by ear. And you thought you played by ear or you didn't.
Yeah.
But there's certain people that can only play certain things.
Yeah.
So, I thought, a deer, a female deer shouldn't be too hard in the key of C, But what do I know? I didn't even get the piano. I didn't get the guitar lesson in. So,
So going back to, when you were in school, what were your interests back then? What were you into when you were in school? Obviously, you weren't playing musical instruments. You obviously would have had a musical interest, but was there anything that you felt that you excelled at that time?
Well, it was funny because I used to deliver. One of the first things I ever did was I delivered the newspapers. And I used to go into this one real estate office and deliver papers. And the guy said to me, you're going to make a really good lawyer someday. And I was only, 11 or 12 years old at the time. And I got thinking, why does he think I'm going to make a good lawyer? Of course, I come home and I got thinking and studying up on lawyers and all the education they needed and thought, well, that ain't happening because I have no interest in that.
Yeah.
But one thing I did have interest in was something called the radio. Really interested me. And I don't know why. But there was a radio announcer in Peterborough by the name of Sean Eyre that had this country radio show on. And I really was fascinated by the fact that he was on there doing this show that was, in those days, it was entertainment. It wasn't just the weather and the news and this was that song and that was that song. They were entertaining people. Yeah. And I thought out of this little box and a little transistor radio I had was this entertainment coming out of there. And I was so fascinated by that I thought I was really going to be in radio. And that ultimately was where it started out to go. I was going to be, when I was in grade 7 and 8, I was doing radio commercials as a little kid for a restaurant out in, called Bobbo's out in Lakefield, Ontario, doing this restaurant and this little kid wanting to go in and have dinner.
Yeah.
And I was really fascinated by it. I liked that. I could hear these commercials and everything, and I thought, this is really something I wanted to do. And I got a little bit of experience with that too, and it was almost like the guitar lesson. It was fun, but it wasn't me. I tried it for a while, and the guy who owned the radio station, Lindsay, was bound and bent that I was going to quit school and come and work there. And I was like $3.50 an hour. I was going to make, $140 a week, and my life was going to be set.
Yeah.
And he convinced me that I'd never have a better opportunity. Well, something told me that wasn't the best opportunity I could ever get. And I know cutting out of school in grade 10 wasn't really the best thing I could have done either. So as I get going on a little bit, I got kind of intrigued by these live shows that Sean was mixed up with. And we kind of developed, a close friendship on the radio side of things. Anyway, I'd call him a lot on there. I'd see him on occasion and everything. And one thing led to another. And I started actually working with him. And one of the parts of the business that I did was selling advertising. And we would do these country shows.
Yeah.
And it might have been a local band. It could have been anybody at the time. It really didn't matter to me, but I got this fascination by this live music thing. So I thought, you know what? I'm wondering if that's something I'm going to do. I wonder if that's something that is going to interest me, because the radio side of things, I couldn't read the news, which is one of the things. First of all, some of those words in there that they were using, I don't remember learning them at the Cordova General Store when I was growing up as a kid. So that didn't make a lot of sense to me. And a lady called me one time and she said, who read that atrocious newscasts on the air. And I said, it was me. She says, it was dreadful. And I kind of thought, you know what? She's right. It was dreadful. I didn't know what I was doing on there. So I kind of came to the conclusion the best part for me would be behind the scenes, whether it's selling radio advertising, doing something. I could keep my finger in there and then maybe get involved doing these particular shows. Well, then I decided I wanted to be an insurance salesman. So I thought, there's what I need to be. I need to sell life insurance. That'd be the greatest thing I could ever do.
Yeah.
Took the exam, went down there. I was 18 years old, walked in the place, and the guy said, what kind of money are you making? And I thought, well, if I tell him $10,000 a year, he won't want me. If I tell him 50, he'll tell me I'm too much. And I said, I'm making $25,000 a year. He said, wow, you're making that kind of money at that age. He said, that's amazing. I said, yep, that's what I'm making. He said, can you bring me any proof of that, like a T4 slip? Well, there was no way you could go online in those days. There was no such a thing. You couldn't make one up.
Yeah.
So lo and behold, I'd found a T4 slip. And I put all the information on there. And I took the T4 slip in there. And the guy says, okay, you've proven the fact that you can make $25,000 a year. You start Monday. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. You know, I don't have any formal training, and here I'm going to be selling life insurance. So I go in there, and he says, now, I need to give you, this wasn't an aptitude test, but very similar to that. And he says, now, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. And he said, I want you to answer me the best way you can. And he says, you go into a restaurant, and the waiter or waitress brings you something that's wrong with the meal. Do you go ahead and eat it, or do you send it back? And I said, well, I'd probably eat it. Wrong. And he says, that's the first mistake. And I thought, oh, God, a good start. So then he said, now, if you were selling insurance, how would you feel about selling your family insurance, your friends and everybody insurance? Because they would be some of your best clients. How would you feel with that? And I said, I'd be petrified with that because I would never want anybody to be mad at something I was doing. I would never be able to do that. Wrong. So I thought, oh, God. So the third question had something to do with how I felt about being a member of service clubs. Well, that about fit in the same category as sending the meal back. That didn't work very good for me either. Yeah. So out of the three questions he asked me, I got the three questions 100% wrong. But yet he said I could still start there. So I come home and I thought about it all, and I thought, you know what? This poor guy thinks I'm worth $500 a week. I'm 18 years old. Something not right here. And my heart said, that's not the direction to go. I went back up, handed in my little card that he gave me, a business card up in the whole bed. I handed them back and said, you know what? I'd rather go back pulling weeds or picking strawberries, because that's basically where I felt I should be, because I didn't want any part of that whatsoever. Yeah. So, as anything in life, things happen because of mistake. First of all, I was a mistake, so that was easy. And the second thing was getting in the music business was kind of a mistake too, because I was working with Sean Eyre at the time, and in those days, the musicians union ruled the roost. Yeah. If they don't like you, you're not going to hire a live band. And they do this thing called blackball you or blacklist you, or whatever the case happened to be. Mm-hmm. And you couldn't do it. I mean, they would tell you if it was a union band, even in a place like Peterborough, I mean, my God, any band that was in there, they had to be a member of the union. Yeah. Well, it was a big union town. General Electric, Quaker Oats, and a number of other big industry companies were there, and everybody was union. I mean, GE hired 9,000 people in that little town, so everybody was unionized. That's just the way it was. Yeah. So one thing they did not like was disc jockeys. They hated disc jockeys. The union. Oh, God. If you were a disc jockey, you couldn't have nothing to do with live music whatsoever. You could play music, but they did not want a disc jockey. And the theory was behind this, strangely enough, is they didn't want the disc jockey having a better inside edge at promoting and what they were doing on the air, because the average agent, manager, promoter couldn't do that. Yeah. So they wouldn't let you do it. Wow. So Sean came up with this idea and said, listen, we really need to get a booking license here. And I can't get it. And I said, well, God, I'm only 17, for God's sakes. What the heck am I going to do? Yeah. So I made application. And one of the things I had to have was a letter from the bank proving that I was stable.
Yeah.
Well, hell, I had about $14 in the bank. That was a good start. So, but I had a Visa card. It was up to the limit, but I had one.
Yeah.
So I said to this bank manager, reminded me of the guy that used to play in Herbie and the Love Bug, Dean. Can't think of his last name. But he was an actor. He looked like this guy.
Yeah.
Fascinated me. So I went in and I said, look, I'm only 17. I've applied to get this booking license, and I need to have a letter of support from a bank. So he looked up the accounts and he said, well, he says, you've got a $700 credit card, and that's got $700 spent on it. He said, you got $14 in this account. What can I tell them? And I said, well, look, I really want to get this booking license. He said, how bad do you want that? And I said, I really want it bad. He said, well, listen, I'll write you a letter in saying our business relationships to date have been wonderful. You've paid your bills on time, and you're a good, credible customer. How's that? And I said, well, it's better than what I've got at the moment.
Yeah.
So up I go, and I march into this musicians union, and I never forget the guy saying, whose application is this? And I said, it's mine. And he said, yours? Like, how old are you? And I said, I'm 17. And he says, and you want a booking license from the American Federation of Musicians? He said, we got to have a board meeting over this. And he said, we got to invite you to speak to the board.
Wow.
Oh, God. He said, you've got a letter from the bank here. I said, yeah, I sure do. He said, wow. He says, what's Sean Eyre got to do with this? And I said, nothing. He says, but you work with him. I said, well, kind of, but I'm trying to branch away from that. I want to do this. And he says, well, I don't know. He said, I would highly doubt that it'll get very far. So the following 2 weeks later, I get a call, and now I got to go to this board meeting. So we're sitting around a table much like this, and there's 8 people there on this board, 8 of them, for God's sakes, and me. And every one of them are pumping me full of questions. But the funny thing is, on that board, every one of those board members, except 2, knew exactly what I was doing and knew exactly who I was working with. And they knew Sean better than anybody.
Yeah.
So they knew what was going on. So they started asking me all these questions about stability and financial, what I was going to do. And I had no connection with radio announcers. And, went on and on and on for about 2 hours, just drilling me at this meeting. Well, finally, I think I'm done. And they decide to hold a vote while I'm there at the table.
Wow. So
they pump up the hands, and one guy's missing at the meeting. So the president can't vote. So now the vote is tied at 3-3. The one guy went against me because he didn't want the other union guys to know, because he figured if the guy that wasn't there was going to be a block in.
Yeah.
Now the president, he hated me. He had no part of me whatsoever, because he knew what the situation was. But he got under pressure so much from the board, strangely enough, the guy puts his hand up and I win this vote 4-3. So now all of a sudden, here I am at 17 years of age. I'm now a member of the American Federation of Musicians, and now I'm a booking agent, and I don't even know what the hell that means.
Yeah.
All I know is that we ran country shows and we brought in different acts. So it was quite a thing. I had to go through and get union contracts made up, and I had to go through a union shop to get them done. We couldn't just go to a local print shop. They had to be done with the union stamp on them and the whole bit. So we get through all of that, and now I'm still in high school. So I'm appointed on the city council, not the city council, but the school council. I'm not even voted on the thing. The guy, one of the teachers, likes me so much, he puts me on the student council, and I'm in charge of entertainment. Now, here I am. I'm used to listening to Kitty Wells and Hank Snow and Wilf Carter and Stompin Tom, and here I am putting together the school formal. That was fun.
Yeah.
But the funny part about it is the school council booked 2 shows from me, and that was the first 2 shows I did as a licensed 17-year-old booking agent.
Wow.
The high school Friday night dance and the formal. And I picked this old 70s rock and roll group to do the formal, and the people killed me, but I liked it.
Yeah.
I mean, I went, I had a great time. But so those are the first 2 things that kind of were done as a licensed booking agent. And I had the plaque for the wall, and it still hangs up on the wall. 38 years later, it's still up there, not dusty or anything. It's just right there. So, and nowadays, the license means absolutely nothing. It didn't mean anything then.
No.
But
procedure.
Well, and when you booked a lot of bands, and especially in Toronto, I mean, you had to file these contracts in the union. Dues would come out for $4.30 and all this stuff, and it really meant absolutely nothing. But supposedly, they were the governing body too, and I'll get into a little bit more how much they helped me in my career as we go on a little bit later, because it come back to kind of bite me with this 4-3 vote. It kind of had its little Waterloo up the line a little bit that it didn't quite turn out to be the greatest thing I thought. But just as a token of memories, every year I send my $100 check in, and up until 2 years ago, I had to send a certified check, and they wouldn't even accept a check from one of their fellow brothers. It had to be a certified check.
And after how many years?
36.
Wow.
They finally changed that I can send a check. So it was like, I'd go down to the bank with this thing, and I think to myself, I just regret doing this, but I respect how it all started.
Yeah.
And for the $100 a year, if anybody ever asks me, am I a licensed booking agent, I can say, yes, I am.
Yeah.
And
so back in the high school when you did those first 2 shows, when your teacher appointed you and you got assigned, did they know you were a licensed booking agent at that time, or you had just did it and no one really knew?
They didn't really know that, but the guy that in town that was kind of the Mr. Entertainment guy, he had 4 or 5 of these rock groups going around. I called them rock groups. I mean, they weren't anything like we've got today. They're kind of like April Wine type cover bands and all that sort of stuff. He knew I had it because he was a little bit worried because he was the only guy in town that had one.
Oh.
And so I got this license, and we did what you called a split commission on the date.
Yeah.
So I think we ended up with 2.5% each or some stupid thing to do this thing. But to me, I think the first one was $500, and the second one for the formal was $700. Like, that was a lot of money.
Yeah.
So, I think I got $27 or something was my share. I only had 14, remember?
Yeah.
So now I've got 27 more. So I was really stepping
almost
up.
doubled your money.
I almost doubled my money. So, it was kind of neat because, I got a chance to see what it was all about. And I had these contracts done up, and here I was, born on a kitchen table in Cordova and singing at the country store, and not being able to play the guitar. Now I'm booking bands at my high school, and I mean, the people on the council thought I was totally nuts because a lot of them would see what I was doing. The old saying is I was country when country wasn't cool. Well, I was. Yeah, here I am going to high school, and they're doing all kinds of stuff and Bay City Rollers and all that stuff, and here I am listening to all this old country stuff, but yet I had this booking license now, and the world was going to be on fire. And I was ready to go, just tackle the whole world. But the problem is, I was ready, but the world wasn't ready. That was the problem. So I was a little wee tadpole in a big, big fish pond. So I had to learn that real quick.
Yeah, because there would have been probably a lot of agents back then.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, there was. In every little town you went to had a union.
Yeah.
Peterborough had a union. Belleville had a union. Oshawa had one. Kingston, they all had them.
Yeah.
So, and it was big stuff. I mean, any of these local bands that were doing these local nightclubs, they were all union members. Only because the cities that they were in were very unionized. Every place had a union. Whether it was a cheese shop or whatever it was, you were a part of some union. So, I would run into these people every once in a while, these people on that board. Someone would whisper to me, over my dead body, would they not give it to you? And on the other side of the coin, there was some people would say, I know what you're doing and you shouldn't be doing it, because I was still selling radio advertising, still in that mix completely, and booking, things at a local bar in Peterborough for like $600 a week. That's what they were getting. A week, not like a night. It was a week. So, and you'd make your $60 commission, and you'd have to go sit in the bar from 9 to 1 the first night to see how things went. And then you'd go out to a different bar the next night, and you'd sit there 9 to 1. And then you'd listen to them complain about hotel accommodations or whatever the case happened to be. So, it was something I would never, ever, ever wish I didn't have. And I wished a lot more people had that experience, because it's important to start things from the bottom and go up.
Yeah.
It's like moving into a mansion after you're living in a one-room apartment. You should never do that. There's a lot of steps in between there you should have. And I think that I would never trade it for anything, because for many, many, many years, I ended up booking a lot of skunky old bars and a lot of places that were pretty scary looking spots. I mean, some of those ones in Northern Ontario, let me tell you, there were some dandies.
Yeah.
And it was good for me because I could see a side of the business that I knew I wanted to get out of real fast. No matter how I had to get out of it, I wanted out of it because I knew it was killing me too. I mean, I was so, we would book the bands in some of these places. And in the one in Peterborough, heck, I was the disc jockey on top of that. And I was doing their promotion at the same time. So good job. And selling tickets at the local arena for a hockey game because I needed the money.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, one of the things I learned real quickly was that you don't go too far without the money. If the money in there, you ain't going.
No.
Because nobody wants to deal with somebody that doesn't have any money, especially in this business. Because usually, if they have no money when you start, they ain't got a hell of a lot left when you're finished.
No.
So you either get it then or you're not going to get it. And I didn't have any money. I didn't have any. And I just had to just do whatever I had to do to survive. And whatever it was, I was determined to do it.
Yeah. Just like a hustle. You just had to hustle, do what you could in a way.
Well, and I think the thing is that's interesting is that up until this day, we're not known as a business that's necessarily legit, for one thing, or a lot of credibility.
Yeah.
So you still fight, and even today, you still fight this shady side of the business that everybody, it's like if you're in the entertainment business, you're not a lot different than a circus act or anything like that. You enter that same category.
Well, there's still a lot of shady people in the business.
Well, there is, and why that still exists today is unbeknownst to me, but it does, and it existed a lot back in the 80s, especially.
Yeah,
it was really, it was just something that I never knew people hated so many people so much, but then I seen nobody was getting paid. Like it would be, I remember people telling me at these clubs that the club owner, if they didn't have a good night stuff, they'd have to literally take a gun or a hammer and to get paid. And it was all cash in those days. And 9 times out of 10, it was $1 bills. That's what they would bring into those bars on a Saturday night. The drafts were $1.50, and they'd be paying these people off. And a lot of times they didn't get paid and had to get pretty vicious.
And that's still happening now. I just heard of a story just like a couple of days ago from a group I was working with, and they just did a show in New York with a pretty big agent, promoter, and I think they were like a $6,000 guarantee at the end of the night. He got a check for $1,700.
Well,
and that was it. And they're trying to get the rest, and he was like, "Well, that's what it is."
Well, it's funny, and I'm going to touch wood as we speak. Out of 39 years, this coming Wednesday, I've never, ever, ever been beaten for a nickel. I've got the money, but it was hard sometimes, but I got it. And I'm very thankful for that. But I've also learned that if you're ever going to be aggressive at something, that's where the aggressiveness has to start. Because whether we like it or whether we don't, whether there's glamour, whether there's lights, cameras, microphone, stage, screaming people, fancy catering, whatever this business happens to be labeled as, it's still a business.
Yeah. And I think once you start chasing it, if you don't get it, you'll never stop chasing it. You'll never catch up. We know someone, we both know, I'm not going to mention the person's name, that deals with an agent that is not too reputable. That's been chasing, and you keep thinking the next show is going to make up for it, and it never, ever makes up for it.
When I look at it this way, as we get going on in here, we can, there's interesting stories that, whether anybody knows who the people are, whether they don't, the stories are not new, they're not fresh, they're never going to end. It's all happening, and I think that one of the things I learned over the years is that it is a business, and it's a very serious business, and the more credible you can become, the more longevity you will have. Yeah. And the more, there's nothing worse than dealing with somebody that you don't know at the end of the trip whether you're going to get your money.
Yeah.
And, or the night out or the next night. And when you can eliminate that pressure from them, you know, I learned many, many times over the years, the best way to get along with somebody that you've never worked with before is say, look, this money is due Friday. Why don't I give it to you now? This is Monday.
Yeah. You
get a lot more credibility out of them, and they can hardly wait to work with you again.
Yeah.
If on Friday you say, can you call me Saturday, you know you're in big trouble. And
I just did that last week with the group we had in the theater here, and it was like Thursday, and wired the money, and I said, check your account, should be there. And he said, what should be there? So your payment. He says, you sent it already? I said, I don't think you guys are going anywhere. You got a couple more days left. And they were shocked. I mean, we've never,
Absolutely.
You know, and their first words is, now you're a real professional.
Absolutely.
That's the first thing they said.
Well, that's the whole thing. And, you know, I learned the same lesson with a guy named Hank Snow many years ago. I was warned that he was going to be the worst guy I ever worked with, ever. He said, you'll never make it. He's vicious. He's violent. He'll scream at you and everything, and he'll be awful. So I got thinking, you know, how am I going to fix that problem? So I was on a 3-day tour, and I had to get the bank draft cut anyway ahead of time, because you can't come back in the middle of the tour and get it done. Yeah. Even though we're just in Sudbury, it's still a long way back to Peterborough. So I went and got it cut, and, you know, I had never met him, and I introduced myself to the bus driver, and he says, Hank, there's some guy out here that's got a check for you. And his name was Brian, I think. So Hank come up, and he said, Hank Snow. I said, Brian Edwards, how are you? He says, I'm great. He says, what kind of check have you got for me? And I said, I've got the payment. And he said, what payment? And I said, for the show. And he says, I haven't started yet. And I said, well, I feel the same way. You've come all the way from Nashville. You were in Sudbury, for God's sake. Where the hell are you going? You know, you're here. So I said, it's far better for me to get this out of the way. And even in his ripe old age, he said, nobody's ever done that before. And I said, well, I'd rather introduce myself to you on a good note than you have to look at me for 3 days and wondering whether you're going to get the money or not. And he keeps saying, here comes that promoter. He's one of those shady guys. I know by looking at him. Yeah. He's only 19 years of age, and this guy's buying me. What's wrong with my age? And why did he ever deal with a guy like this? Now I'm in control. He's now got that money. Hank, would you mind doing a couple radio interviews tomorrow? What's he going to say? No. Mm-hmm. He's going to say, for you, I'll do whatever you want to do. Yeah. And that's how it starts. And you just said you've learned the same thing over the years, that when you start off things with people, not only showing them that you're financially able to deal with it, but everything else goes along with it. When they're here, they're treated well, or on the road, wherever it happens to be. You don't have to lay out caviar and all that sort of stuff. Just treat them nice. Treat them like human beings. And try to be nice to them and everything else. And I think that in the long run, you can win. And I don't know. I've always found that's been the key.
And the end result is that the audience wins.
Well, that's what I was.
The ones who bought the tickets. And
well, I was just going to say, you know, if I ever had to put anything into priority, even today, I've got a list of priorities in this industry. And number one priority for many, many, many years. And without this priority, we all have nothing. And that's the people that put out the money. And a lot of people don't think of those people. It happens to be the audience. Yeah. And they're number one, as far as I'm concerned. And you try to treat them with respect, give them a fair show for the money, and not be afraid of them. Yeah. Like, they don't know who I am, but standing out there, if somebody's got a problem where they want to, most times they want to tell you how much they enjoyed themselves. You should never be afraid to do that. Yeah. I remember, you know, we were on a tour one time down in Florida. I was working with this act I never worked before, but I got to see the show, and the guy says, great, come on backstage. We're going to hang out during the intermission. I said, are you crazy? I didn't come over all this way to see this show to hang out backstage. I want to be out there with those people. Yeah. Why would you want to be out with them? I said, well, first of all, it's always nice to hear what they thought of the show, being they paid the money. And second of all, I get to know who this audience is. If I'm not out there, I don't know who the heck they are. No. He says, God, man, you're weird. And I said, well, I'm weird, but I don't know any other way to do it. I mean, if you treat the audience great and you treat the entertainers great, you can't go wrong. No. Because you can last for as long as you want without, because the audience begins to know you respect them and feel for them. And it's the same with the artist, you know. And I think, I don't want to say it's frustrating to me, because it isn't, because I mean, it's a big industry here. We all survive, whether you're a boxing promoter, golf promoter, hockey promoter, whatever the heck you happen to be, or you're a circus, or if you promote new country, old country, ballet, whatever you promote, it's a big industry here. And we all have a space in here. And I think that when you see people that have lasted a long time, they last a long time for a reason. Usually not because they didn't pay anybody, or because they were nasty to somebody, or treating the audience horribly. All those things usually are intact, or they don't make it. It's like, and you know, I just think that if more people, I wish there was a course that could be taught, and I'm not sure there is.
Yeah.
Because the old saying is, there's an old country song, if you can't feel it, it ain't there.
Yeah.
And it's true. If you don't understand it, there's no way you can't open a book and say, okay, now, when this artist comes in, you treat them like this, and you do this, and you do that. When an audience asks a question, here's how you answer. If you ain't got it, and you can't absorb it or pick it up, you're not going to get it. There's no way.
Yeah, and that translates really to everyone in the music industry, right down to, you know, we talk all the time. An artist may want to go out and he has to pick, I'm not going to pick on drummers, I'm just going to say a drummer, for instance. You're not always going to pick the best drummer that's available. You're going to pick who you rather spend the next 5, 6, 7 weeks with on the road. And as long as they can do the job, it's way more important that you get along and there's a good relationship. And that translates back to the audience. It translates back to your dealings with the artist. And it trickles to every facet of it. And, you know, your relationship with the venue and everything.
Well, you know, there's nothing better than getting a compliment back such as this. We've never worked with a more professional organization that started with the initial phone call right to the time the bus pulled out of the parking lot. Everything on there was bang on.
Yeah.
So you look at that and you say, now, that means everything, because then you know what you're doing. And the people also that are in there know what you're doing too.
Yeah.
You know, with advancing all of our shows and being the technical director for as many years as you have with us, that there's probably more times you get off the phone and you say, God, I was frustrated with all this sort of stuff. They didn't, you know, it just wasn't right. But you kept your calm. You got the job done. You did it properly. When you're done that, people, all that stuff, they appreciate it at the end of the day. You go through some frustrations, but you come away from there with a clean reputation and all of it's done. And it all has to start somewhere. I mean, not one person, if anybody ever thinks this, then they're reading their own publicity too much. If one person thinks it's them that's doing all this stuff, they're wrong. No. Because the whole team has to be very, very important. Yeah. You can't do anything. You know, you just can't.
Yeah, you know, I think of all the times on a technical end of things, you go into a venue and you could be as frustrated as anything. You hear about their stories. They say, oh, the crew that just came in last night, how horrible they were, and how badly they were treated. And sometimes you just got to be able to know, be able to read the people you're working with, be able to look at their room, look at the equipment, and decide how good I can make this. You know, there's going to be a limit to my day. So let's figure out what the limit is and make it work to the best of the venue and the crew and whatever it is. Because it's going to be different everywhere you go. Sometimes the PA is going to be great. Sometimes it's going to be terrible. If everything's terrible in there, I mean, you pretty well know it as you're going in anyways. If you didn't know that before you went in, then you didn't do your job. But there's no sense complaining about it once you're there because you've already signed off on it. I mean, it is what it is. Make the best of it.
The old saying goes, when somebody says you did a good job, you say to yourself, I wasn't hired to do a bad job.
Yeah.
So if you're going to do this thing, whatever it is we do, and sometimes I'm not even sure myself, whatever it is we do, and somebody's often asked me, I said, let me think about it and I'll let you know, because there's some days you say to yourself, what do I do? And, and I'm kind of saying that kind of tongue in cheek, but in reality, you wonder sometimes, and I think it comes from frustrations too, probably, that you begin to wonder where you fit in and why and how it all kind of happened. But when you look at everything, I know in my case especially, there's always been really, really good people around me that make everything look great. And it's important to have that. And I think over the years you can pick good people. Yeah. You can pick, somebody says to me, I can do this, and this, and I've done this, and I've done that, and everything else. And I said, well, look, you give me 20 minutes with you and I'll tell you how good you are. You don't have to tell me that stuff. Yeah. You can send me a resume that says all this stuff on there. And if it looks too good, I wonder why you're not there in the first place. Why are you calling me? Yeah. Like, that's one of the things I'm always concerned about. So in the whole scheme of things, what I've also learned is that what's necessarily good for this guy or this lady or whatever the case is, isn't necessarily good for me, or vice versa. Yeah. When I was booking these, go back to this deal, when I was booking these clubs and all this sort of stuff and learning how to do the bit. And one of the things that was really unique with the Sean connection was that there was a festival in Peterborough called it's called Music Fest now, but it was called the Arts and Water Festival in those days. They wanted Tommy Hunter to come and perform at this festival. Now remember, I'm 18 years of age now. Yeah. And I'm trying to book this guy that's got a national television show on, and probably in more demand than any country act in the country at the time. And I remember Sean had his home number and calling up there, and he said, "Who did you say you were again?" And I told him, and he said, "Well, you better call my lawyer in London, Ontario, Sam Lerner." So I called him, and so Sam had said, "Well, I don't know. Doesn't like to deal with a lot of new agents and stuff because, we got burnt by a couple of them out west and we're not really sure anymore." And I said, "Well, he's known Sean Eyre a long time. There's been a disc jockey in Peterborough." And he said, "Well, he knows a lot of disc jockeys." That's how the lawyer responded back to him. And I said, "Well, look, this date is good." He said, how good are you for the money?" And I said, "Well, I'm about as good as the festival is." He said, "Well, that's a bad thing to say because he just got beached on a festival out in Western Canada last week, and we're suing them for $60,000. And oh my God, good start. I said, "Well, I'll tell you this much. I know the city backs the festival." And I said, "Whatever we can do to make Tommy comfortable, we'll make it happen." "Well, I don't know. I'll get back to you." So I'm waiting and waiting and waiting. Well, finally, I got a hold of him again. He said, yeah, I've been trying to get Tommy." He says, "Well, look, we'll do it." And he gave me the price, and he says, "Before he goes on that stage, I want that certified check in his hands, or he's not going to even get out of the car." No problem. Now, remember, my experience at this stage of the game, if I got $1,000 on that contract, it was a big deal. Yeah. Well, now here we go. Now we're going into this next level all of a sudden. So we get the date all signed up, and I send the deposit through and the whole bit, which in those days, thank God, they did things like a business like we should all be doing today, but that necessarily isn't the case. There was an actual contract, and somebody actually signed it, and a deposit actually took place that day, and everybody read those contracts and paid attention to them, which was kind of neat. So quite a novelty. So we got that all done, and now it's show day. So now, here we are. We come in there, and so I see Tommy pull up, and I go over to the car, and he says, "I want to see the guy that booked me here on this date." And I said, "Well, it was me." And he says, "It can't be you. It must have been your father." And I said, "No, it was me." He said, "How old are you?" And I said, "I'm going to be 18 in 2 weeks." He says, "You're 17 years of age, and you're booking me on a show like this?" And I said, "And here's the money." And he looked at me, and he says, "I still don't believe it was you. It couldn't be you." Yeah. So the show got all done, and I gave him my invoice for my commission. So he said, "Now, who is this payable to, your dad?" And I said, he couldn't get it through his head that it was me. And I said, no, it's me. And I said, "Here's the name of the company." And he said, "I can't believe that you, at your age, are booking a show like me. And not only have you got it booked, and everything was right." So that kind of opened up things now to a level I'd never seen before. Yeah. And I rather liked it because it took a heck of a lot of booking bands in a club for a month at a time to make up for what this check was. It was a big deal for me. Yeah. So now I could actually go down to the bank and say, "Hey, look, remember that letter you wrote? this is the deal. So anyway, that was kind of the little touch of the iceberg. Now I've had a chance to say, okay, I've gone from this, now I'm gone to this part. Now, what was interesting was I could now say I'd booked Tommy Hunter.
Yeah.
So when I've talked to somebody else, say, well, who else have you booked? And I'd say, well, I booked Jack Bailey in Peterborough, and I booked Patsy Hamilton in Peterborough, and I booked Joey Aylward in a group called Fire. And they look at me and say, who in the heck is that? But as soon as you say I booked Tommy Hunter,
Yeah.
they said, wow, man, that must have been something. So now you've got this credibility that says, still don't have any money, but it was to the point where at least I could do something on another level that kind of said, I stand a chance at it. But I'm still this little wee fish trying to swim up this pond, and I wasn't getting anywhere.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, what I'm going to try to do now is I'll get a hold of my buddy, and I knew him from years ago in Toronto, named David Peaver. David was an agent at the time that looked after a group called Canadian Zephyr, and he discovered a guy named Harold McIntyre.
Yeah.
And he used to do a show in Toronto called the Policemen's Association Show. We'd bring in George Strait and Gene Watson and George Jones and all that other stuff.
That was a big deal.
That was a huge deal. So David and I got along fairly well. But I was still an 18-year-old kid from Peterborough, and I was going to get into a business pretty soon that these guys have ruled for years. Now remember, they're warm and fuzzy, but I'm still this little outsider. And I got an opinion now, and that's even worse, because there's nothing worse than somebody that's just booked Tommy Hunter and has got an opinion and a bit of an attitude, because that definitely came with the territory, trust me. I thought that the world was at my fingertips and nothing could ever stop it, ever. So thank God for a guy like David that could bring me down to where I needed to be brought down to rather quickly, because I needed to be brought down, and I knew that.
Yeah, because you're probably a bit of a high from from booking that.
And don't tell me, I'll tell you type thing, you know. So I kind of got, another unique thing happened with David. He called me one day and he says, I've got this show up in Toronto, and it's an old country singer. And this is old. Back in 1980, they were using that term. An old country singer named Kitty Wells. And I said to Sean, man, this would be great. And my mom used to rock me to sleep singing How Far Is Heaven, for God's sakes. I know that song like the back of my hand. And I said, we should take a shot on that thing. So David and I, strangely enough, became agents together. But in this case, we had to, David kind of act as a broker. And he sold us the show, I think, for $2,000 or something. It wasn't a lot of money. But we'd put this show on the Lindsay Exhibition Grounds. And for some strange reason, I clicked with her husband, Johnny Wright. I don't know why, but I did. And again, I'm this 18-year-old. And I think the fact of anybody in any business, especially in the business that they're in, if anybody was 18 years old had an interest in people that were in their 70s, that's a pretty big thing.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen. And I'm sure it doesn't happen today much either. So he had said, I wish you guys would bring us up to Canada sometime. And I said, we will. And he said, no, you're like all the other agents. You never will. But he liked me because we made a poster up and I put his name on the poster. Oh. And I think he was so thrilled that I put the name Johnny Wright and Bobby Wright on a poster, and nobody else did. They called it the Kitty Wells Show. He was smart enough to know she was the draw, but they were the show. The three of them were. So anyway, one thing leads to another. And the next year we bring them into Bob Cajun. And it's even bigger. Well, we meet again. I'm sure it almost as if we never met before. But I'll tell you one thing he did remember. He remembered the fact that I knew to put his name on stuff. So he got home to Nashville and he said, why don't you come down to Daytona Beach? We're going on a holiday with the family. Well, I just started to cry. I just lost it. I mean, here I am. I'm going to Florida with my sister Ella in tow, and we're going to the Daytona Beach, the Hawaiian Inn, with a country superstar for a week.
Hawaiian in Florida.
Hawaiian in Florida in July. So I rounded up enough money, and down we went. We ended up flying into this place. So here I am. I haven't got, again, I keep bringing this money part up because it was actually funny. Here I am down at Daytona Beach, and we're having a ball, playing water volleyball and drinking pina coladas out by the pool. I mean, it was great. I was in my glory.
Yeah.
You know, when you're supposed to be allowed to be drinking at that age, but we certainly managed to get a few in us. So he asked me for breakfast one morning, and a strange thing happened to me that turned my life around completely. He said, I want you to represent us in Canada. I looked over at him, and I was just starstruck, and I said, yes, I'm all over this. I never been out of Peterborough, for God's sakes, other than a trip to Florida, let alone going across Canada. Yeah. So he says, now I got this date in Moncton, New Brunswick at a nightclub called the Urban Corral. And he says, now we're doing 2 nights in there. He says, I'll give you this date, and can you get a few tie-in dates to go with it? I said, well, I'm sure. No problem. Yeah. So all the confidence in the world, you know. So he shook hands and he said, well, until further notice, you'll be our agent in Canada. So I come home and I didn't know what the heck I'd got myself into, but it sounded intriguing to me. And I thought, first Tommy Hunter, and now we're booking an act from the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville. I mean, my God, what else can be better than this? So I went to work on this thing, and we ended up doing 28 dates in a row that ended in Calgary, Alberta, that started with a little thing, and I was in places I'd never been in my life. In those days, you didn't look things up on the internet. You got a directory assistant, and you got to hold all the nightclubs you could find, because she'd do anything, no matter where it was. If there was $1 involved and kept the band working, Johnny'd do it. Yeah. So that's where that education comes with me. So we did 28 days. I mean, it was just...
That's huge.
Whew,
yeah.
I was on the road for a month, living on that bus. That's how much I like. Now that's why I like buses so much. And we were on that bus, and it was just the most frightening experience I ever had, because I was so nervous every night that I didn't know what to do. I didn't know about non-residence taxes. I didn't know about any of that stuff whatsoever. And they didn't sleep in a hotel room either. Yeah. I mean, you kind of washed it, everything else you needed to do on that bus going down that road, whether you liked it or whether you didn't, or whether there were 6 people in there before you were doing that. Yeah. And I kind of grew up, and that didn't happen in my world at home. That wasn't something we did. You know, it was kind of all new to me. And, you know, seeing people in the morning, first thing that you kind of had visions of that you didn't quite have the same vision of at that time of night, you know, it was just all kind of unique to me. So we did that tour, and I got off of that thing, and I didn't know what to think. So shortly after that, I really thought that, you know, I needed to kind of make a decision now. Now I'm getting close to 19. I'm not living at home at this time. I'm out on my own. The agency's somewhat going. I'm not sure whether I'm an agent, am I a promoter, and I'm a manager, and I'm a merchandise salesman, and I book hotels. What do I do? So I thought, you know, I don't like this label of being I'm an agent. I don't like that, because I wasn't an agent. No. I was a promoter. I don't know what I was. Yeah. I was somebody that put shows together. I mean, I had a license called me an agent, but I didn't know that's what I was or not. So I thought, well, I carried on a little bit longer, and I thought it would be a big thing to really dive in. So a lady named Charley MacNeil had a #1 song on the radio at the time. And my buddy Doug Nobes at the Memorial Center in Peterborough had hired me to come in and work the hockey games. And Doug and I clicked real well. We were both from Cordova. So that was a small world. I mean, so Doug knew a lot of the family, and I knew him, and he knew Sean quite well. So we were talking one day, and he would tell me about the business in the old days and working with a lot of these acts like Liberace and all these people. And I was quite fascinated by all that. So I'd always liked Gene Watson and I liked Charley MacNeil. I don't know why. Charley had some big records out.
Yeah.
She was the flavor of the day. She was great. And I loved Gene Watson. Just thought he was the be all and end all. So I decided to go out and I would buy a show from Nashville. Now here I am. My credibility's now. I booked Kitty Wells and I booked Tommy Hunter. Well, there's the two right there in the front window. So now I'm going to book Gene Watson. I'm going to take Charley MacNeil out. So I booked them for 4 days. We do Sudbury, Sault Ste. Marie, North Bay, and Peterborough. And I had committed about $60,000 US, at which, there's no way I had that kind of money.
Yeah.
But I thought that didn't matter. It would, no matter what you did, it was going to work.
Yeah.
So we put them out and on sale and everything. And as we got closer and closer and closer to the date, it's something that wasn't happening. It was called people buying tickets. And in those days, the rule of thumb was if you sold 1,000 tickets beforehand, you'd sell 1,000 at the door.
Yeah.
50-50, no matter what, no matter who you had in there. So Peterborough was fine. I mean, I think we actually had 1,000 people here, which was big.
Yeah.
At $17.50 a ticket or $18.50, wherever it was. That was a big deal.
Yeah.
But there was a problem with the other three. We weren't quite at that stage. So using the little theory I learned, I thought, well, if this buy one, get one type of thing at the door comes true, then I'm going to be fine. We're going to be no problem. We'll at least break even. Well, our friends in North Bay, Sudbury, and Sault Ste. Marie obviously didn't read the same manual I did because that didn't happen.
Wow.
So the net loss in the tour was about $38,000. So at the time I was living with Sean Eyre and his wife Donna, who certainly taught me everything in life, but they were very gracious and wonderful people, and they were able to co-sign a loan for me in those days for $38,000 at 23.5% interest.
Wow.
And it was absolutely frightening because I'd gone from all this high and now I was down and out.
Yeah.
I had nothing. I lost everything and lost the $38,000. I was down $38,000. So I was able to deal and keep going with these little shows I was doing and everything and at least pay the interest on the loan. I could get that part done.
And going back, you paid the act.
The acts got paid.
Yeah.
Yep, they did. Nobody would ever see that because I knew if that ever happened once. In those days, they didn't give you a third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10 chance to let you keep digging the hole deeper. If you had the old saying is if you had a half a hole, you still had a hole, no matter how it was. You were in there. So I thought, what am I going to do now? So I thought, you know what? I'm going to go back to what I know best. So I picked up the phone and called Johnny Wright. I said, there's an old country singer that I really, really like for a long time, and he will never respond to my emails, yeah. Never respond to my letters or anything, and his name is Wilf Carter. Johnny says, hell, I know Wilf Carter. He said, we're doing a show with him in Hamilton in 2 weeks. I said, well, would you introduce him to me? He said, yeah, you come down there to this thing. So I go down there, and there's 17 country acts on this show. Little Jimmy Dickens, Porter Wagoner, you name it, they were on there by the ton. The old package shows. Yeah. And Wilf was one of the acts. So Johnny had introduced me to him. And I said to him, I've always wanted to do, and of course Johnny jumped into this bit of, well, he's the finest promoter that Canada's ever seen. We've done hundreds of dates with this guy. I'm only 19 years old, for God's sake, we're doing hundreds of them. Anyway, so Wilf said, well, Johnny, the only way I do the tour is if you and Kitty come with me. Well, that's exactly what Johnny wanted to hear.
Yeah.
So we had done 5 dates the next summer. And Wilf Carter had just turned 80 years of age, the first tour we did.
Wow.
So I'm going into the bank now. You can picture this. Here I come walking in, and they want to report on how I'm going to pay this $38,000.
Yeah.
I said, well, I got this really neat thing. If you can lend me $20,000 more, I'm going to do this big project. And the guy says, well, how old are these people? And I said, well, I think Kitty Wells is about 72. And he just sat back in the chair and looked at me. He said, well, how old is this other guy, this Skip Carter? And I said, Wilf Carter. He said, yeah, Wilf Carter, I mean. He's 80. He says, 80. And you want me to lend you $20,000 and you're taking an 80-year-old out? Are you crazy? And I said, well, he draws a lot of people. He said, yeah, but what happens if he doesn't make it? I said, well, I'm going to tell you something. If you don't make it, I'm in big trouble anyway. So what the heck? You're already in for 38. Now you might as well go in for 58. Well, believe it or not, he gave me the money.
Wow.
But back to the co-signers again. They had to sign for that too.
Yeah.
So we went and did that tour. And in 5 days, I'd made enough money to pay the $20,000 back and the $38,000 that we had outstanding.
Wow. That's great.
So when I have his picture above my head every day and it says, have a nice day, Wilf Carter, I do have a nice day because thanks to him and Johnny and Kitty on the road there, that tour paid off everything.
Yeah.
And it was just something that it was almost as if this gift had come down and sat in my lap and said, here you go again, making a mistake, and it's paying off.
Yeah.
So I was ever so grateful, and they opened up my eyes to a lot of things that led me to be able to then get into the booking of fairs. Why not? Kitty Wells and the fair, I thought, what the heck? I'm going to go and try to promote them at these fairs. Yeah. So we did several of them, actually. Ron Sparling was a great agent up in Ottawa, Ontario, still a great agent in Ottawa, and he controlled probably 80% of the fair market, but he liked them, and he knew them. And he was so happy that he could deal with them with an agent in Canada, because what I learned to do with all these Nashville acts is they didn't want to come to Canada for one day.
No.
You need to have 3.
Yeah.
So if Ron took
Even though it's the same distance to go to Florida to do one show.
Closer.
Yeah, closer.
It was this Canada thing.
Yeah.
I needed 3 dates. So I learned that from Johnny. He'd say, well, if we're going to come up there, we need to have 3 dates. So that was fine. So I got to, between Ron Sparling and Janet Walter Williams and myself, we all of a sudden had a meeting and we said, look, let's all work together and we'll do these fairs. And we did. It was, here I am going into this fair convention in Toronto, and I'm like a fish out of water again, because all these agents been doing these fairs for forever. And now all of a sudden here comes this kid with a polyester suit jacket on from Peterborough, and he's looking after Kitty Wells. That, thank God, in those days, that was a big thing for these fairs. They just loved it.
Yeah.
And we were able to we could do 3 or 4 in a row and make it work. And if we couldn't, at least I could put them in the Carolina Club downtown Toronto for a nightclub for 3 nights to at least pay the band. That was the deal. Pay the band and we'll be there. So, and they do 2 shows a night in those places that were long. And sometimes 3 if we had to. It didn't matter. So we could do whatever you needed to do. So that introduced me to another area that I was never very familiar with at all. All I knew was that we went down to the Royal York, and I was going to have a room there. There was some kind of a suite or whatever. It was a room with a parlor thing on it. It was going to cost me like $800 a night to have this thing to be part of this industry. So any money we made on the fairs, we had already invested in the suite at the Royal York anyways. Hope to heck something would happen.
Yeah.
So it kind of became rather unique that I was able to get into that business, not huge, but enough to say, okay, now I'm in the fair business too. But now we've got nightclubs we can do. We can lose money in arena shows. We know how to do that. And now we're going to do this fair business. So there was a group outside of Peterborough called the Leahy family. There was 11 brothers and sisters that Sean knew quite well, because we used to run a lot of fiddle contests around, and the kids were all in the fiddle contests. So they were with an agent in Toronto. Vivian Murphy was her name.
Oh, gosh.
And she would put them on all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, I remember Vivian.
The problem with Vivian Murphy was, in those kids' eyes, she was old.
Yeah.
She wasn't old. She probably was 56, what I am now, but she was considered old because those kids were kids.
Yeah.
And they really got intrigued what I was doing. They kind of thought this would be kind of fun. So I used to go out to the farm, we'd have these meetings, and I'd go meet the mother and father and all this sort of stuff. And, you know, the kids would be pushing so hard to get somebody that was their age, because if nothing else, they would at least have somebody that could think somewhat the way they did. Little did they know, I didn't know how to think as a 19-year-old. I was already 45 in the way I thought.
Yeah.
But I knew that audience, because that audience that came to see the Leahys were the 45 and 55 and 65-year-old people, if not older. So they knew, the mom and dad knew I knew that.
Yeah.
So they knew that if nothing else, I was safe enough to go with them, that I could, you know, get to the point where, so I signed this management contract with the Leahys. I didn't know what the word manager even meant. I had to look it up in the dictionary, and then I had to get some papers in that somebody had mailed me on what a manager was in the entertainment industry, because I had no idea.
No Google.
Google.
No.
No nothing. So I thought, yeah, I think I can do that. That'd be a lot of fun. So they bring me out a stack of contracts from over the years, from the Calgary Stampede, Edmonton Klondike days, the Regina Buffalo days, the Super X in Saskatoon, to the Thunder Bay exhibition, to you name it. And they had done them all, because were just had this reputation across Canada. Well, I hadn't even been to those places, let alone done them.
Yeah.
So I send out this big thing that, I'm now the manager of the Leahys, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that, we're going to book this, and we're going to book that. So the first year, we had done every exhibition, I think, from one end of Canada to the other, because they were such a good family act that it would work. They could go out there and step dance and sing and do their thing. And there was such a novelty that it worked out very, very well. So we had done, we got along famously well. It was almost too well, because when you get that close to somebody, if something starts to go south, it doesn't make it any easier.
No.
But we were able to do probably about 5, maybe 6 years all across North America, a lot of dates in the U.S. And, it led me into an industry I'd never been involved with before.
Yeah.
And it let me do stuff where fairs were kind of unique, as you know, you worked enough of them yourself, that they never were built for putting live bands and stuff into entertainment. Matter of fact, it was almost like oil and water, because wherever the horses and the horse show and the tractor pulls and everything, that was number one. And for you to interfere by setting some kind of a snake across the track that do a sound thing, that was just, why would you do that to us? So it became as much fun as it was and unique, and as much eating as much dust as you could eat in a week. It was just kind of a new thing for me. It was able to book places that I never had a chance to do. And there lies our association. When we first started working together back mid-'80s, we first started. I was booking your show in various fairs in Canada and the U.S. And it was because of that initial experience that I was able to do that.
Yeah.
And I could understand what you did. I could understand the audience. I knew the fair boards and all that sort of stuff. So it became more apparent in that industry more than anything. As I stayed in it, the longer I stayed into it, the more I realized that if you weren't connected with any of those people, you weren't going anywhere.
No, it's that industry was really relationship based.
The worst I'd ever seen.
Yeah.
Especially Ontario, we already had the association, thanks to Ron Sparling and Janet Williams and other agents that we're involved with. We could work together. Yeah. But once you got west of Thunder Bay, that all disappeared. Now you're back again. Here I am again. I'm this new kid on the block. The calling card was, I had the Leahy family, the Walters family, Kitty Wells, the little Jimmy Dickens, Tommy Hunter, so on and so forth. That lent the credibility which I needed, because without that, I wouldn't have had any of it. As years went on, whether it was the fair convention that traveled across Canada at the CAE, or the one in Toronto at the Royal York, or the one in Las Vegas, you would become a more of a familiar person. Yeah. Somebody would walk by and say, I remember you from last year. If you don't mind, I'm going to finish this cigar. I'll blow the smoke in your face, and then we'll talk. And that's basically what it was. Yeah. A bunch of people that were buying entertainment that usually smoked cigars, and they were awful to deal with, and it was horrible.
Yeah.
So But you tolerated. There was a lot of great people in that industry, like Bob Gray from Edmonton, who ran the Klondike Days, and our connection was kind of a unique one. Although it came through booking the Leahys and whatnot, the guy that ran the Klondike Days was actually originally from Woodstock, Ontario, and moved to Peterborough and ran the fair there, named Colin Forbes.
Yeah.
So that's where so when Colin found out he was in with a guy from Peterborough, he felt quite good and told Bob to, to feel good with this guy. He was great and the whole bit. So not that I ever believed I was great, but in Colin's eyes I was, and I just didn't even question it. Bob was good to work with, and he worked well with us.
And even though, you're dealing with Canada, and I think there still is, if you're from Ontario and you're working in the West, that was not looked upon as being something that was very friendly. They didn't want anybody from Ontario or from the East, they would say, to step on in their territory at all.
When you talk to most Westerners, very few of them, their East is Winnipeg. And that's if they get to there, they've gone East. And they've never trusted anybody from Ontario.
No.
And it's worse in the East. A lot of people have always thought I'm from the Maritimes. And when I'm down there, I never say I'm not, but I say thank you very much. Because I never want to be considered, especially from Toronto. That's the last place you want to be from in this industry, and down there. Because they don't like people from Toronto.
No.
In Newfoundland, they'll tell you, they hate you. And that's just the way it is. And so I'm very cautious to say, yeah, I'm from Ontario. Oh, you're not in Toronto. I say, are you kidding? I wouldn't live in that city to save my soul. And it's true, but I certainly was very cautious too. But you're absolutely bang on. When you say there's territories, it certainly is very much so. And I think when you get the confidence of a Westerner, even if they're transplanted from Ontario, they're still a Westerner, and they get that mentality. You're welcome to no end, as long as they trust you. Because I guess there must have been something, especially over the years, where Ontario people always look down at the West, or they look down on the East. And it carried through in this business too. They always thought because you're always expensive. When you're from Toronto, you were expensive.
Yeah.
That was the big thing. Or don't tell me what to do just because you're from Toronto.
Yeah.
So I was lucky. I could say, look at it, I'm from Peterborough. Oh, they say the Peterborough Petes. I said, yeah, exactly. The hockey team. That's what
connection was.
Comfort level perfect then. So anyway, that was kind of a unique industry that I liked a lot. I especially liked the bigger ones. When you went into Edmonton and you went into Calgary or you went into Vancouver, it was more of you weren't tripping over the track that the same horse had decided to do his business on before you started. You weren't
they had a spot for entertainment.
Proper stages. Yeah. They were big time. I mean, you go in there, the sound and lighting and soundmen and lighting people that were already there when you got there. They had proper dressing rooms. And it was just this real neat buzz. I loved it. I think Tommy Hunter did the Klondike Days. God, I think it was 14 or 15 or 16 years in a row. It was a lot.
Wow. And
you would go back there and you felt like it was just like coming home. You know, it was really, really good. So that was kind of a unique part of the business that then at times I really miss it. And then at times I don't. And I think doing what we do now versus what we did then, I think it was a great experience. So if we had to go back and do what we could, but it's something we can do without.
It's not what it used to be, though.
No, no. Jeez,
I mean, back then, you consider when no fair came to town, that was the big thing for the year.
Oh boy, that was it.
Klondike Days were how long was that? 2 weeks usually, 2.5 weeks.
It was 10 days, and so was Calgary was 10 days, and Red Deer was 8. Yeah. So and you could work them all. Like you could do a little string there. Like when we worked the Carlton Show Band in those markets, we would do, we do all of Calgary, all of Edmonton, and 2 or 3 or 4 days in the middle in Red Deer just to kind of bridge it through.
Yeah.
And that brought you 24 days. Well, and they were smart enough out there. They knew enough to come to you and say, look, the 3 of us will get together. This is the money. Yeah. It might not be the money you want a day, but it's a heck of a lot more money you'd make in a month doing anything else. Exactly. So you went and did it. And they knew, coming from Ontario, the cost of getting out there, you might as well do all of them. So the bargaining power was always in their favor. Yeah. It's funny because we booked the Leahys one time in Vancouver at the P&E. they had showcased at the IATSE Fair Convention in Las Vegas. And Mrs. Leahy really wasn't warm and fuzzy with the agent at that time. And he just kind of gave her the creeps a little bit. So she said, I've got this guy's phone number that was running the P&E in Vancouver, and he really expressed interest in the kids. So, of course, I called him, and he said, oh, God, I've been trying to get a hold of some agent for the Leahys. He said, we've got 14 days out here this year. Can you make it? And I said, well, heck yeah, we can make it. No problem. So I'd never done anything in British Columbia at all, because that was way out there for me. So we went out there and did this thing. Well, what was unique in the middle of all of it, CTV television called. And a girl named Patty Janetta, I think her last name was Janetta, I think it's Patty, was doing a television show, a Christmas show. And they wanted the Leahys on it.
Yeah.
And I said, well, the only problem is we're in Vancouver at the P&E. Oh, she says, that's too bad. She said, I wish we could get this to work. She said, the taping is at 10 o'clock in the morning. And I'm thinking, 10 o'clock in the morning? That's 7 o'clock in Vancouver. I said, well, can I get back to you? And she said, well, I've already written them off the list. I said, not yet. I said, just leave it with me. So I got on the phone and called Air Canada, and I said, what's your last flight out of Vancouver going to Toronto? They said, well, it leaves at midnight. I said, what time does it get in there? She says, 6:45. Something, and show's taping at 10, lands at 6:45. They don't sleep anyway. So what the heck? So I said, what time are you done? And she says, well, we could probably get them out of here by about 1:30. And I'm thinking, that's only 10:30 in Vancouver, and our show's not till 5 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, I'm going to talk to the kids. Well, of course, anything to do, I'd just taken the kids on a white water rafting ride in the middle of the mountains out in British Columbia the night before. We went and stayed overnight up there. And here I am taking all these little kids under the age of 8 on this whitewater raft, come whipping down this whatever the thing was called, the Canyon River out there. And I thought, these kids were wired by this point. So I said, guess what we're going to do tomorrow? And they said, oh, what are we going to do? We're all excited. I said, how would you like to do Patty Janetta's Christmas show? And they said, great. Where is it? And I said, it's Toronto. And they said, when? I said, tomorrow. And they said, yeah, let's do it. And I said, we're going to fly out at midnight. I said, I'm not flying out. You guys are going to fly out. I'm staying here. Because if something happens, the plane's late, I got to come up with some excuse of where the heck you are.
Yeah.
So they flew back from Toronto, and they went and did that television show. And they pulled that thing off like no tomorrow. Because the choreographer had worked with them before, and he knew when you got little kids that step dance and play, just let them do what they do, and you've got a television show right there.
Yeah.
Have them smile, stick their hands up when they're done, and you're good.
Yeah.
So they flew back. They landed at 4:30 at the Vancouver airport, and our show was at 6 o'clock. Wow, you talk about hustle. I picked them up in this old van I had, and we brought them back there, and I never did say a word to anybody because I knew the guy that ran the P&E would have a heart attack that I'd done something like that. He had a heart attack when I took them on that tube ride down the Fraser Canyon.
Yeah.
So anyway, they come out and did that show, and they did 3 shows that night when they got back, and they were absolutely incredible, and was probably the most adventurous thing I've ever done or ever will do. I mean, we've been pretty tight at some of these flights, and 2 shows in 2 different spots in one day I've done lots of times, but that was something. So it was, the fair business kind of led me to that, and that was probably one of the most challenging and greatest experiences that I ever had. Yeah. So it was good.
So eventually, obviously, you kind of phased yourself out of the fair business and to some degree, and then slid yourself more into touring in the soft seat performing arts center type market. Was there kind of something in between there, or what happened in between there?
Well, between all of that, back to Johnny Wright again. He called me one day and wanted me to come down and spend a few days in Nashville. And they lived in a little place called Madison, Tennessee.
Yeah.
And he kind of thought it'd be fun that I moved down to Nashville and start working. And they had this little old stone house that he had about maybe half a block from the museum. And they owned the whole block pretty well at that time. And there's an old stone house that he wanted me to stay in and start this agency in across the road from there, from beside them. But I couldn't stay in that house. There was a funeral home across the road, and it bothered me. I'm thinking, there's no way that I'm staying in that house by myself down here across from a funeral home. So I said I stayed for 2 weeks. And I lived in the Fiddler's Inn Hotel out by Music Valley Drive.
Yeah.
Cracker Barrel was close to there, so I could walk up the hill and be at a Cracker Barrel. So I took enough clothes down there, and I decided that he had an office for me in his place because he knew I wasn't stuck on staying in that house. So he'd set up an office for me where the museum was and everything. So I went in on a Friday and I stayed the weekend, and then so now comes Monday. So it's my first day in Nashville. So here I am now. Now I'm really getting big, man. I'm moving from Peterborough to Nashville. Not anything in between. No Toronto or Hamilton or in Oshawa or nothing.
Yeah.
Bang. I'm going right down. I'm going to take Nashville on. I'm ready. 21 years old. Can hardly wait. So here I go. So I go down there, and I get down there Monday. I set up a phone line and everything. So we have a couple of meetings together about these dates we're going to do. Now, I'm still green as grass at home, let alone I know nothing about the U.S. whatsoever other than when I'm 21, I'm going to Las Vegas. I knew that part. That's about all I knew. And I'd been to Nashville once before. So he had me go out to lunch with a couple of these agents that were down there. One guy's name was Joe Taylor, and another guy, he used to look after Fair and Young, and we went out and had lunch together. So they're going through all this stuff about being an agent and everything and how good Johnny Wright was and the whole bit. But the problem was with it, here I was coming in on their turf now.
Yeah.
I was reading a book on Bob Eubanks wrote, and he got a letter one night in the mail at his hotel, and get out of this town. We don't welcome people like you in this town. I'm thinking, God, if I never got a letter like that, I never would have went back. But so I got the first day in. So now come the second day. Now what am I going to do? So back to I go down here again, and same routine.
Yeah.
Go in, have a little chit chat in the morning. So I go back in this office now, and I say, now what do I do? So I'm sitting there, and another guy calls me and says, let's go out for supper tomorrow night. So I thought, okay. So I go out with him, another agent. So I go out and do all that. Then Wednesday. Now this is day number 4 now, by Thursday, the time they got here. Now Johnny and Kitty are now on the road for a week.
Yeah.
So here I am. I'm sitting down in this museum for a week. And I got nothing to do. I know nobody down there. The agents are friendly enough, but they're friendly with me for a reason. They're not friendly because I'm coming in to be an agent. They're friendly with me, expecting I'm going to book some of their acts.
Oh, yeah.
So they're cautious. Wine and dine them and all this sort of stuff. But as near as I could figure, their social aspect of everything was so big. It was dinners, lunches, cocktails, drinking, socializing. And as much as I was that age, I kind of liked part of that. I didn't see where that was doing anything for me. I couldn't figure where that would ever mean anything for my career or anything. And I couldn't imagine calling up a fair in Matheson, Ontario, and saying it's Brian Edwards from Nashville. They'd probably be more comfortable dealing with a guy named Brian Edwards from Peterborough at that particular time. So I thought about the Nashville thing. And when Johnny and Kitty come back, I had gone home by this point. I had taken my 2 months worth of clothes, and back I went. And he was pretty disappointed that I had left. And I said, well, no, I'm coming back down because I'm going to finish what I agreed to start. But I said, it might not be finishing it the way you want me to finish it, because as near as I can figure, from what I see in town here in those days, it was ran by about 4 agents at the time. Either Top Billing was one of the big agencies down there, United Artists, and maybe 2 or 3 other ones, Billy Deaton Agency, and that was about it. They ran everything. And I kind of referred to them and latter days as glorified order takers. And that's not being nasty, it's being true.
Yeah.
They would never ever have to leave town. They never seen Matheson, Ontario. Why would you ever want to go to Matheson, Ontario? What's in Matheson, Ontario?
Yeah.
I'm the opposite. I'd rather go see where you are and what you're doing, and then I'll know what to get you the next time. If I go there and this doesn't work, nothing's going to work. But these guys didn't know anything about this sort of thing. They never went anywhere. They would go and sit, and that's all they did all day long. Well, that wasn't for me at all. I couldn't relate to that whatsoever. I mean, it sounded good. Where are you living? Well, I'm living in Nashville. Oh my God, man, that's great. And I'd say, no, it's not. It's not great because I'm blocked in this corner now. Now,
stuck.
With hindsight, if I would have stuck it out, it might have been, but I don't think it wasn't for me. And it still isn't for me. And it probably never will be for me because we've built this. One of the things I've learned with maybe working in the fair industry or working with grassroots artists is that there's part of Canada and the U.S. that people don't necessarily pay attention to. And it's called rural Canada or rural the U.S.
Yeah.
And it's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's the heart and soul. Wilf Carter had an old line saying, I work the big cities on the way to the small towns. And he taught me small towns is where it's at.
Yeah.
And it's still where it's at today because when you go into these smaller communities, you're now bringing an event in. You're not in the middle of 700 other events that are coming there that year and getting lost in the shuffle. It's usually the only event they've got.
Yeah.
Like we'd go to work some of these arenas in Coldwater, Ontario. I mean, heck, that place, or Bob Cajun, or Pembroke, or, it didn't matter. Where it was, Englehart, Ontario, or anywhere. We're going into these places. And then I thought, you know what? That's where I'm going to go. I'm going to specialize in taking entertainment to places that don't get entertainment.
Yeah.
Because you can't go wrong. Even if you didn't like the music, you liked the event. You wanted to be seen at something around town. Everybody was a social, it was like going to church.
Yeah.
It's a social gathering. Only thing was missing was the strawberry supper. And we could get one of those if we wanted to. So I ventured into that side of things for a long time. And quite frankly, to a certain degree, I still do. And it had its really unique sides of things that it was a step up from a fair, but not a lot more because it had a lot of complications to it. The crowds were fine. The shows went over well.
Yeah.
But they weren't necessarily equipped for bringing in a show.
Yeah.
You have to have a stage built. You'd have to have step-up transformers to get the power converted that they needed. It was some voltage that had to be converted to amps, and the special machine had to come in, or the place would have to be rewired to the tune of about $4,000 or $5,000.
Yeah.
So all of that had its little problems, but the rewards at the end of it were tremendous because you'd go in, and it was phenomenal. I mean, we put Charley Pride in some of those arenas, and God, you have 2,700 people in these places. They're only supposed to hold 1,200, but you'd pack them in anyway.
Yeah.
You'd go in, and it was a big deal. And you know what? The audience, I felt, and I wasn't performing at all, I felt, just from the vibe in there, that even if that was the worst show that artist ever gave, it was the best show that town had ever seen.
Yeah.
So the artists could let their hair down and get more out of them than they did. They weren't under any pressure. They don't have to worry about some reporter from the Toronto Star coming or somebody like that. They could go in and have fun, and they did.
Yeah.
And it was great because you could go work these places, and subsequently, as you mentioned earlier, it led to some other type of possibilities, like soft seat theaters. We certainly didn't start out by going to the Roy Thompson Hall or the O'Keefe Centre downtown Toronto, but we got there.
Yeah.
But we didn't start there. We would go in and do the Lindsay Academy Theatre, or we'd go in and do the Belleville High School, and just things around. But it worked.
Yeah.
You would go in and do these places, and it was phenomenal.
We'll talk about the complications of doing shows in the small towns. Not only do you had all the staging and everything you had to do to put the show on, there was no ticket master. So you probably had to arrange ticket locations at every single location. I mean, that alone is like a huge job.
Well, about that time when all that stuff was going, it was at one point I was literally a one-person puppet show for a while because A, I couldn't afford to bring anybody in, and B, there was nothing to do. I mean, whatever we had to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, Sean and I still worked together a lot, but he had his radio show to continue with, and this agency and promotion, whatever you want to call it, was booming. I mean, it was busy. So I approached my sister, Ella, and said, look, why don't you come over here and we'll start working on this. She said, I'd love all that stuff.
Yeah.
It'd be great. And, we worked together and all this sort of stuff. And we would do shows up in a little town called Englehart, Ontario, which is way up past New Liskeard and all this other stuff. I mean, it's up there. But I met the fire chief. I called him one day in town. And he happened to be a volunteer firefighter. And I said, how would you like to raise a bit of money for the fire department? And of course, nobody ever thought ever coming to Englehart. I mean, what the heck? That was great.
Yeah.
I said, now, the problem is, Jim, I need somebody to sell tickets. He said, well, what does that mean? So I thought, well, there's no sense in doing that if you're coming back with a question of what does that mean, because you're in big trouble. There was no credit cards in those days, and It was all cash. So we literally had to jump in the car and drive from Peterborough up there to put tickets in the outlets. Because the week before the show, they'd be running out of them. So you'd go up there and bring the cash all back, go back up there again, supply tickets, and the places would say, listen, I don't want more than 100 tickets in this place because that means I've got, $1,500 a year money. If we ever got broken in, I don't want to take the responsibility.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, she'd just get home and back up she'd go again. So she'd get in my car and up she'd go, pick up the ticket money up there. Or a part-time person was working in there and would hide the tickets under somewhere. She'd get up there and there'd be like $200. And she said, well, there should be $1,500. Well, I couldn't get a hold of you, but before you got here, we found the other 80 tickets. So she'd have to leave the 100 and come all the way back and say, I'm coming all the way back. I've got $300 of the ticket money. So as much as but it did create some interesting little problems that we had to overcome.
Yeah.
And it was it was entertaining because everything was cash. Everything.
Yeah.
We were selling all the merchandise in those days too. And we'd sell, $15,000 worth of tickets at the door. I mean, you'd have all this money. And I had this big old brown travel bag I had, and I had it wrapped full of money. It was money. And I'd wrap it around my leg at night and sleep with it in bed because I'm afraid someone's going to rob me. Well, I'm thinking, what am I going to do anyway? If they come in with a gun, chances are that bag's going. I would give it to them. But it was rather, and then the credit card come on stream shortly after that, and we could take phone orders, which helped a little bit.
Yeah.
But it was still a problem going into these little communities. If anything maybe dried up a lot of them, that's what it was. I mean, that one tour we did with Rita MacNeil in all those little towns, I mean, it was pretty busy.
Yeah.
Because we sold every one of them out. And so between all of them, you're probably talking 7,000. I mean, that's $80,000 ticket money you're carrying around a brown paper bag out on the road.
Yeah, and there's not like a TD branch at every small little town you can stop into.
No, you couldn't. Well, as a matter of fact, I think I was in with the credit union at that time.
Yeah.
And if you try to drop off cash today at a bank, it's even worse. They'll lock you up. They don't want any cash in the banks today. No. And I keep saying to the guy, well, just a minute now. What do they do when Tim Hortons come in? Do you tell them to go home? And he says, it costs us money to handle cash. We don't want cash in here.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, what kind of sense does that make?
No.
But there's no cash out there anymore to worry about anyway. Everybody's debit and credit and Bitcoin or whatever the heck it is they've got everything but money.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, a strange thing.
So how did I wanted to get into Stompin Tom, working and touring with Tom a little bit. How did that whole thing come about? Because I know Tom stopped touring for a long time and came back in the early 90s, and you were the person who took that on.
Well, one of the biggest things, I'd seen Tom perform when I was 8 years old. He came to do the exhibition in Peterborough. What I didn't know at the time that I knew in latter years. It was actually Tom that told me this. It was actually Sean Eyre that I was working with that brought him into the fair, because he was buying entertainment for the fair in those days, which I didn't know anything about. They probably give him $500 and said, "You bring the entertainment in." Tom was one of them.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'd met Tom when at that particular fair, and it had this strange impression at the time on me that I had thought as an 8-year-old that I literally had met God. I thought this was something I'd never met anybody like this before in my life.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't long after that he ended up at one of our house parties that my mom and dad had at home, because the guy that my dad worked with driving truck give him the name Stompin Tom. He was a waiter at the local bar in Peterborough, and one night he introduced him instead of a Tom Connor as a Stompin Tom, and that stuck with him. And of course, that was kind of the Peterborough connection. Well, I had written letters and I'd done everything I could, because he had left the business, and I thought I was doomed. I was 14 years old. I thought my life was gone. I thought that was the end of me. It was horrible. So when Sean was on the radio, of course, that's who I'd call him and request all the time. It drove him right up the wall. So anyway, Tom had formed a record company called Boot Records, and he had, at one time, he owned controlled 80% of the publishing in Canada of any music that was Canadian. Plus, this record company was the only one with Canadian distribution.
Wow.
They had like Leona Boyd and Rita MacNeil and you name it. Tom's catalog, of course, and because Tom was smart enough to keep the catalog, so he owned the whole thing. So I ended up touching base with a guy named Yuri Krychuk, who was Tom's manager, who had about a personality of a toenail that was wet. That wasn't good. Very arrogant, very rude, very curt. But he had a brother in there that I think he brought in because he knew he could at least have the personality.
Yeah.
So we had opened up a record shop at Peterborough called Sunshine's Record Bar or something like that. And they had a lot of the records that we wanted. So we ended up becoming a wholesaler of records through them. So again, that was what I thought was my connection to Tom.
Yeah.
I'd send these letters on my old underwriter typewriter, typing one thing at a time, and send them in these letters, and never, ever, ever a response. Back to this mistake thing again. We got to keep bringing that up, because as this story goes on, the word mistake will come out a lot, because that's exactly what it is. As there's been more mistakes made that turned into great things. That it's phenomenal. So I was doing tours with Wilf Carter and Hank Snow and a couple of other acts at the time. And the phone call came one day from EMI Records, and I knew them quite well because Frank Mills was with them. So I knew, they knew me, I knew them, and they knew how to get a hold of me for Wilf. So this guy calls up and he says, "Hey, it's Jody from EMI." I said, "Hey, Jody, how are you?" He says, "Great, man." He says, "Listen, we're having this party for Stompin Tom downtown at the Matador Club in May the 15th. I said, "Oh my God, I could cry. I would miss that for the world." And he says, of course, what's he going to say? "No, you're not invited," because he wants me to get to Wilf Carter at this point, because he wanted Wilf there. So he's, "Oh, Brian, great. That's wonderful." I said, "Knew Tom, da-da-da-da-da-da-da." Because Tom had just signed the deal with EMI Records. He'd done the Katie Lang TV special, signed the deal with EMI. Yeah. And in the middle of all of this, I was kind of sensing something was going to happen, because Tom said he was never going back on the road again. That was it.
Yeah.
So, famous last words. Since I hear that words, I love those words. They're music to my ears. So anyway, I said to, so this Jody says, "Yeah." And he said, "Oh, by the way, can you get an invite to Wilf Carter from me?" I said, "Oh, sure, I'll get it." I mean, Wilf at this time was probably 88 or 89, living in Arizona. And although I knew him and spent a lot of time communicating with him, there's no way he'd jumping on a plane to go anywhere, let alone the Matador Club in downtown Toronto on a Friday night at 9:30. So we go to this thing, and Barbara and I weren't even married at that time. And I was absolutely a nervous wreck. I was shaking to go into this club. And Jody had promised me that he'd introduce him to me. So I thought, well, I'm going to put a letter together. One more crack at it. I'm going to say, "Look, it's my lifelong dream, da-da-da-da-da,
Yeah.
unprofessionally written with this underwrite typewriter, but he could read it, no problem. And I put a Wilf Carter cassette in there with it, just to kind of cement the Wilf Carter thing. So about maybe an hour at this party, they were having what they called a comeback party. Tom was going to do a dozen songs at this thing.
Yeah.
And he'd been deathly sick with the flu for about 3 weeks, and I didn't know that, but he didn't get in there till, it was about maybe a half an hour before he was going to perform. And he was just as nervous as anybody. He hadn't been on the stage
forever, yeah.
14 years. So I'd seen Jody at the thing, and I thanked him very, very much. And I said, I've got this package for Tom. He said, well, I can give it to him. I said, well, you did mention on the phone that, maybe we could get to say hello. So Tom had a few people around him in those days that were kind of people that were neighbors and stuff that he kind of, I think he felt comfortable having them around him because it's the first time he kind of been out in the public in a while.
Yeah.
So it was almost like not a security team, but enough kind of keeping just, things kind of away. So Jody finally comes over again and says, okay, well, come over, I want to say hello to Tom. And I said, can I get a picture taken yet? Which I still hang on my wall. Right? And he says, so Tom come over and I lost it. I cried like a baby. Wow. And he said, okay, I remember you're a good buddy and all this sort of stuff. And I said, I can't tell you what this means to me. And so anyway, he took the letter and the whole bit. Well, one thing leads to another and absolutely no communication whatsoever. Because he had a good buddy in Peterborough by the name of Kent Brockwell, who was a blind, strangely enough, this isn't funny, but it's true. He was a blind country singer that took trail rides out on his farm. Mm-hmm. So I used to go out trail riding there with this blind guy, lead the pack on these horses. That'll give you a lot of confidence. But anyway, so I stayed in touch with him a fair bit because I knew the connection with Tom there.
Yeah.
So I thought nothing was happening, but I knew something was going to happen. I just kept sensing something was going to happen with this guy. So one thing leads to another, and I write Dean Cameron a note from EMI Records. So Dean calls me up and says, Brian, I've had 18 letters from across Canada already, plus CPI, who was the big concert promoter in the day, wants them to go out. And he said, I don't know, but I'll tell you what I'll do for you. I'll pass this letter along to Tom. So, okay. Well, about 2 months later, in the middle of the night, when I had the office in the basement of my house, I hear the fax machine going at about 2:30 in the morning because it rang.
Yeah.
And I thought, who the heck could be sending me a fax at 2:30 in the morning? Well, I go downstairs, and there's this handwritten note, and it says, Dear Brian, thanks for the letter that Dean Cameron sent me. Please keep in mind I have a lot of things to consider with this, and I'm not even sure I'm going to go back out and do any tour dates. But the next time I'm in Peterborough visiting Kent Brockwell, I'll get a hold of him. We'll have a beer together. Tom. Well, I knew that's exactly who it was.
Yeah.
So I was just, God, I was crazy that day. I thought something had really, really happened to me. It's a twilight zone. So I could Barb, go upstairs, get her out of bed, and look at this, look at this, look at this. I'm showing her this thing. She said, well, who's that? I says, who the heck do you think it is? It's Tom. The Tom? I said, the Tom. She said, oh, boy. So anyway, so that was kind of a neat thing because about a month after that, a guy named Henry McGuirk called me.
Yeah. And
Henry was a reporter with Country Music News out of Ottawa who had done a big editorial on Tom. It was so big it was over 2 months. When Tom told you a story, it wasn't one sentence. It was a story.
Yeah.
You got the whole deal, which was great because you got the whole thing.
Yeah.
So Henry calls. He says, "Listen, what are you doing next Thursday night at about 10:30? Not 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock. About 10:30." I said, "Probably going to bed." Well, if you can meet me, and he told me this place to meet him outside of Toronto. I'll pick you up. And he says, if you're interested, I'd like to go up. Tom would like to talk to you. Well, I knew what Tom, and I knew Henry McGuirk and the whole bit. And I said, well, not even a question. I'll be there.
Yeah.
So up I go to this place. And literally at 10:30, out we go. So we get to the house about 11 o'clock. And Lena, Tom's wife, I had met many times over the years selling, she used to sell the merchandise for Tom. And of course, I'd met her at the party at the Matador.
Yeah.
She's just as hospitable as ever. Hugs and kisses and good to see you and all that sort of stuff. And so it was great. We had a great, and she says, oh, Tom is downstairs and he's got, I think, a guy named Art Hawes was down there, and Henry McGurk, myself, and a guy that used to be with EMI Records or Capitol Records called Scoot Irwin, who was kind of involved a little bit. So I went down, and it was probably at the time, it was bringing it all back. And what was really interesting was the place you had met was the furnace room. So Tom had an old forced air furnace there, oil, and a card table, and 4 chairs around the card table, and that's where you sat and did everything.
Yeah.
And you could hear the furnace kicking on and the whole bit. So we're telling stories about everybody under the sun for 4.5 hours. Now we're just about getting into around 3 o'clock. So I get this splitting headache. So I said, you don't have any Tylenol, do you? And he says, why? And I said, I got this headache. He said, oh, goddamn headache, Edwards. And he says, we wouldn't have stuff like that in this house. We don't take. He says, have another drink. He said, it'll do you good. And I said, if I have another drink, I'll be on the floor. Well, he's just he's in his prime now because he was nocturnal.
Yeah.
So, I mean, starting a meeting at 10:30 at night for him was great. Everybody else at the party might be a little bit ruffled up. So about 3 o'clock in the morning, he says, well, now I think we should maybe talk a little bit of business now that we got you here and all this sort of stuff. And he said, and he started going through this whole deal about he wants to do Canada, and he had he'd researched every venue across Canada with no internet in these days and with no anything, and how big the places sat. That's what threw me. And he just knew all of this stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there looking at this list of stuff, and he said, so I met with a couple of promoters now, and he says, I want to go out and do 70 shows from Vancouver Island right through to the Magdalen Islands. What the hell are the Magdalen Islands? I haven't even heard of them before. So, as it turns out, it's just off the coast of Prince Edward Island, but that was a great education for me because I never knew where the heck they were before. And Tom's wife is from the Magdalen Islands. Yeah. He sang a lot of songs about them, Entry Island and My Home out Cradled Out in the Waves and all that stuff. So I knew that, I kind of knew about it anyway. Yeah. So he said, we're going to go out and do 70 shows. I said, well, that's not bad. I said, we should be able to do that in about 10 weeks. And he says, 10 weeks. He said, now this is where we might have a bit of a problem. And he says, I want to spread this over 6 months. And I said, what do you want to do, like a weekend come home? He says, no. I want to go out and do 70 shows in 6 months from one end of Canada to the other. And I said, why? And he says, well, here's my philosophy. He said, I drive every road in this country. I know every blade of grass from one end of the country to the other. And he does. Mm-hmm. I mean, hitchhiked it back enough times years ago. And I want to work 2.5 shows every 2 weeks. No, I want to work 2.5 shows a week. So I want to work 5 shows every 2 weeks. And I said, 5 shows every 2 weeks. Now, that's not possible. He said, well, I'm not a truck driver. And he said, my system is set up in such a way, I tried to, when I left the road, go back to this, going to bed at 10 o'clock, get up at 6 or 8 in the morning. It didn't work. He said, I'm going to work those days. I want at least 1 day off a week. So, that's reasonable, but how in the hell are we doing 2.5 shows a week with only 1 day off a week? I couldn't get that through my head. And of course, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. So then he starts going into the money side of things.
Yeah.
So what his expectations and mathematically. Now, this is a guy that'll tell you that in no formal, post-secondary school education. He wasn't a mathematician. He wasn't anything like that. He was a guy that got up and performed and sang songs about Canada and stomped his foot. Well, that was the first mistake, because that's the last thing he is. That's about 10% of his life. 90% of it is, a good businessman, and a damn good one.
Yeah.
So we worked everything. He talked about what his expectation was money-wise and the whole bit. So I said, well, I'm beginning to sound like a broken record, but I'm going to tell you that I don't have any money. I said, I've got some money, but I certainly don't have enough money to set up 70 dates across Canada, because you'd need auditorium rental, you had deposits on hotels in those days, advertising. Yeah. I mean, that would cost $75,000 easy. That's then. That's 1990.
Yeah.
And, we were talking playing Massey Hall downtown Toronto. I mean, my God. I mean, the rent in those days is like $10,000 and God knows what else. And of course I'm still this little guy from Peterborough. They want that money now, not when we get there.
Yeah.
They want it today. So as we get a little bit towards 4:30 in the morning, he says, Edwards, I like you, because he said, if you can get along with Hank Snow, you can get along with anybody. And Wilf Carter was my favorite singer, but he said, I don't think you understand me too much. He said, we either have a deal tonight before you leave, or we won't have a deal. Well, I'm determined I'm not leaving that house without a deal.
Yeah.
But I also know I don't have any money. So I said to him, look, I'll give it my heart and soul more than anybody will give it. And I said, I'm not from the big city. I'm not sure I understand the way you tour, but I know the music well enough, and I know who I think the audience is. And he says, well, that's why you're still here, because I like that part. Because he says, I can't necessarily get that from the other people I've talked to. But he said, you know how to go into these little communities and everything else. And he said, that's a big thing for me. So my audience is. So as it turned out, we ended up shaking hands at about 5:30 in the morning, and we did a percentage deal on everything, including the merchandise, and when we were going to start, and how many days we were going to do. And the next week, a check for $50,000 from him landed into my door to help promote the tour.
Wow.
What do you think of that? So not only didn't I have any money going in there, I'd never been in any of those places before.
Yeah.
He had enough faith in me to send me the money on a loan basis with no interest or no anything. And here we were 4 months later. As you know, you were on that tour with us. Starting in Owen Sound, Ontario at the high school, where they wouldn't let them smoke or drink in the dressing room, which drove them crazy. And we're on our way.
Was it that quick that it came together?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
This was in January. I was up there seeing him. So that's how quick it was. Look,
Jeez.
One thing about Tom, that's how we did business for 23 years. Tom didn't call me 3 years ahead of the tour. Tom called me and said, would you like to come out for a visit?
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, he wrote a contract up. And I took it to my lawyer, and he said, who the hell's his lawyer? And I said, God, I don't know. He says, my God, I've never seen anything like this in my life. He says, this is unbelievable. So I said to Tom, I called him, I had to call after 4. He didn't call before 4 o'clock in the afternoon, because you just didn't do that. I said, my lawyer wants to speak to your lawyer. He says, I don't have a lawyer. And I said, well, he wants to know who wrote this contract up. He says, I wrote the contract up. So I said, okay. So I called the lawyer back, and he says, there's no way that this guy could write this up. Well, in latter years, I found out that he basically rewrote the EMI contract too, and it was more legal than the one they had.
Really?
Because he researched all that stuff.
Yeah.
Tom would do a contract with you, or me, or who he was doing it with, that cut out 99% of the stuff that didn't matter, and literally didn't matter, but the stuff he put in there was so real that it was, we used the same contract forever.
Yeah.
I just changed the dates. I kept it on my computer because he did everything when you had a hand type letter from him, he had an old underwriter typer and he did it himself.
Yeah.
On his own, the same, no word processor, no nothing. It was, and so I took that, had it retyped in the computer and just saved it, and we would just change the dates on it. So,
and that's hard to imagine, back then, as you said, there's no internet, there's
nothing.
That's a lot of research.
So I had to rely on a lot of people at that time. One was yourself coming out there. You come on that tour with me.
Yeah.
I knew you better than I knew anybody in that mix, and at least I knew you're in that department. You're going to be looking out for me too, because I had to have somebody. Because I had to go. I used Wall Sound out of Ottawa or something.
Yeah,
I never forget. We were doing a rehearsal up at the Pines in Bridgenorth, Ontario, and Tom come over to me and they were setting up. He says, "Now there's some funny little black boxes on the stage up there. What the heck is that?" I said, "They're a monitor." He says, "A monitor? And what the heck is that?" I said, "Well, it's basically you'll be able to hear yourself." He said, "Are you nuts? I don't want to hear myself through that thing." And I said, "Well, give it a try and see if you like it."
Yeah.
So he says, "God, Edwards, I don't know about you." And of course, I always thought he had a way to keep you on the edge.
Yeah.
But deep down inside, he respected what you were doing. And we did that sound check deal, and he came over to me and he says, "Are you sure these guys are going to be okay?" He says, I don't need something that fancy. Because remember, he'd worked these arenas and he had 2 trainer columns, one on either side of the stage, and a guitar player and a bass player. That was it.
Yeah.
And now we're bringing him into a drummer. Everything was electronic.
Keyboard, steel
and steel and the whole bit.
Yeah.
Now he had the steel at the Horseshoe.
Yeah.
Mickey Andrews worked there many years ago with him. So here we go. We go out there and we're going to do this tour. And I would say for the most part, it was very successful. But there's a lot of them that were not successful.
Yeah.
And I think in the day, and this is kind of funny as things kind of come around in life, people thought it was somebody impersonating him. It wasn't the real guy.
Oh, yeah.
So, and I thought, I wonder how they'd ever think that. I mean, nobody does that. So anyway.
Not then.
So I'd have to go on quite an educational thing to get him to understand that, that's just the way it was. We had to go with modern technology and the whole bit. But I made a deal with him, which he did. He wanted, when the part of the deal was either when I wasn't there, which he hated that I wasn't out there,
yeah,
that whoever was there had to be me. So if there's a question that had to be answered at 4:00 in the morning or 4:30, that answer had to be the answer and had to stand. So when I go home, I call my sister Ellen. I said, "Look, I know you've got a few young kids at home, but what do you think of this?" And she said, "Well, I'd do anything for you. I'll go out and do the tour." And I said, "Well, I don't know this guy very well. I like him, but he spooks me a little bit because he's tough as nails." Mm-hmm. And I said, "I don't know if you'll be able to handle him out there or not." So I did the first 2 shows, and then I had to leave. I was on the tour road with Wilf Carter, which he said, "If it wasn't Wilf Carter, I wouldn't let you go, you bugger." So I said, "Well, you're in good hands," in the whole bit. And it was interesting because Tom had never had a lady on the road with him in the band or anything. Well, now other than Lena was out there towards the end of when he was performing in the 70s. But now he's got 2 of them. He's got my sister Ella, and now he's got Mary McIntyre playing the piano.
Yeah.
So he's now a little bit concerned because now all of a sudden he doesn't have me who signed the deal. He's got Ella out there, and I'll tell you, they had some interesting conversations through the night. But at the end of the day, they both respected each other a lot, and that tour. When that thing ended at Massey Hall and we did 2 shows down there, he had that place absolutely jam-packed in both nights. I mean, he told me, this other thing he taught me, he said, whatever you're going to do, when you do Toronto, do not announce Toronto before you announce all these little towns, because the people from the little towns won't like me.
Yeah.
they will think I have to go to Toronto, and that's the only place they can see me. And he says, Toronto is there because it will be big at the end, but I don't want people in the little towns to forget I think the same of them too.
Yeah.
So he taught me a lot. I probably learned more from Tom from a business perspective than anybody because he was all business.
Yeah, and I think people have a tough time believing that's what he was like.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, but he certainly was.
Oh boy, I would. We'd get to the part where it was funny because even though, well, he entrusted me with his mother's ashes for a month at my house, for God's sake. So we got to the point where, we had this mutual respect for each other. But the good thing about working with Tom was this. Never once could I leave a meeting and say we agreed on everything both together. But we'd shake hands and say, I'll agree to disagree, but I respect you and I respected him. And he would, the first tour, I sent him the tour route and I wasn't home conveniently. So he called Ella and let her have it about, what the hell does he think I am? A truck driver, for God's sakes? Look at this. I said I wanted 1 day off a week. When I'm driving 300 miles, that's not a day off. I want to get out of my bed in the morning, look out that window and see the truck and say, great, I don't have to go anywhere today. I don't have to do a show. That's a day off. I'm only asking for 1 day off a week. What can he not get through his head?
Yeah.
I'd say, but you've got all these other days off. He said, driving 250 miles isn't a day off. He says, that's harder than doing a show.
Yeah.
So we did Victoria and Vancouver back to back one day. And we had to get on a ferry and go to Vancouver and go in and do the show at the same time. And he was so mad at me. And he'd say, Edwards, if it was anybody else, I'd have fired them long ago. But he says, for some reason, I like you. And he said, you almost killed me. He says, Stompin Tom getting up in the morning at 11 o'clock and getting on a ferry and going to Vancouver. What in the hell is wrong with you? I'd say, look, it's the only time we could get Vancouver. He said, I know you better than that, Edwards. It's a Saturday night. That's why you want it. He said, forget about all that stuff. He said, if they want to come and see me, it won't matter what night of the week. And he was right.
Yeah.
Everything he said, he was right. I mean, he would have a meeting with some of those musicians on the road. And in 5 minutes, I could tell you just by his expression whether you were going to last or not, because a lot of them didn't last.
No.
And it was a situation, as Tom said, and you talked about this earlier. You talked about musicians, whether were you always looking for the best studio musicians in the world to travel the road that could get every note perfect? Or were you looking for people out there that, especially on that tour, that was a tough tour. You had to have lots of patience.
Yeah.
You had to get along with everybody. And you basically had to live in isolation because you weren't going anywhere.
No.
And Tom didn't want to stay in anything but drive-up door rural motels, and the least people knew where they were, the better. So some of them were some dandies. But he didn't want anybody interfering with them, and he didn't want them interfering with anybody else.
Yeah.
I mean, you went out for dinner, and you damn well better be back when you're supposed to be back, and you wouldn't like it.
Yeah.
He always felt that almost responsible for you out on the road. It didn't come across that way at times, but, I've read a lot of stories since about people saying, his contracts made the band drink and made them do this and made them do that. Well, there were several musicians out on that trip never touched a drop of alcohol at all. And he had as much respect for them as he did anywhere else. He had probably more respect for them than the fact that they stood up and said, I don't drink, and didn't drink instead of drinking to appease him.
Yeah.
He thought that was, when you stood up and said to him, I don't agree to that, because he would give you that benefit of the doubt and say, that's not how I see it, but I understand why you do this. And say, but, we had a deal that always worked. And it was a funny little clause that went in. We would go work on these band contracts or any contracts, and they were nothing more than just making sure everybody understood everything. But there was a line in there that was really funny. It says, any discrepancies in here, the word of Stompin Tom was final. Well, I don't know why we even did the contracts up, because that superseded anything anyway.
Yeah.
But very rarely would we have to use that, because he treated everybody out there, if you like to drink beer or smoke cigarettes, you're never going to do without either one of those two ever.
Yeah.
Because there was one of the trucks was full of Moosehead beer constantly, all the time, no matter what. We were even getting close to being out. We were full. We never, ever, ever were ever going to run out. And at least once, if not twice a week, he'd take you out for a dinner and spend $1,000 on the dinner. And you might not go to the place till 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning at the restaurant, but you'd have been well fed and watered.
Yeah.
And drink whatever you want and eat whatever you want and not pay a nickel.
Yeah.
And here he would be out there with a wad of cash in his pocket that would scare you because he never used a credit card or a check or anything. He was the type of guy that, from the old school, that believed cash was king.
Yeah.
And he had an old doctor's bag and it had a false bottom in it. And underneath that was money. And he just kept, that's how he was.
Yeah.
So, we got along famously well. And I mean, God, we must have done probably 250 shows, if not more, together. So and towards the end, when he stopped touring, before he stopped touring, I was a little bit more selective of where we went.
Yeah.
And how many days. He certainly got his 2.5 shows a weekend then. I was very cautious that we didn't overdo it. He finally said to me, Edward, you finally got this right. It's taken you 23 years and you got the way we should tour across Canada. But no, he was good. I got to meet a lot of people with him. Was two in particular that I remember very quickly. One is Parliament Hill with the Queen up there. That was quite something.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget that part. And the Order of Canada, him and Mr. Dressup got it the same night.
Oh, wow.
And there was a lady, I can't remember her name now, but she was on a wheelchair. So Tom thought he kind of break dice a little bit and ride around the room in this wheelchair on the back with this lady with those electronic wheelchairs. And it was him standing up there with a moose head and a cigarette in his hand going around Rideau Hall with this wheelchair. It was great. But he introduced me. I got a chance to meet a lot of people that I never would have met in 100 years without him.
Yeah.
And, whether it was a closing of the Maple Leaf Gardens or working in the Air Canada Centre or, doing 3 or 4 shots on Parliament Hill, meeting Wayne Gretzky's induction to the Hall of Fame and meeting all those hockey players that I knew all those years. And it was just great. He had this way about him that people gravitated to him, and it was great. And the shows were always, now there's somebody that, speaking about the audience being everything, I mean, he'd be very, very respectful, and especially when the days when he was autographing as much as he could, I mean, God, we'd be there for 4 or 5 hours easy, because you didn't come in and shake Tom's hand and say goodbye. Tom wanted to know all about you and where you lived and what the kids did and all this other stuff, and he just took time with you. And that's what, when he worked the bars, he'd sit down, have a drink, as many people as he could in the bars. That's why he could drink so much beer. Because any night they'd send him up 10 or 12 beers and he could drink them. He never was I don't want to call him a binge drinker. He was just steady.
Yeah.
Never a problem, with me anyway. He and I, we won't, we could go on. I could talk to him about for 3 days. But one of the things that was rather interesting, we never, ever, ever had a disagreement that we could never figure out. And at the end of the day, he wrote me quite a letter about 8 months before he died, I think it was. He says, I've never told you this before, but I've got a lot of respect for you. You did a lot of things for my family and myself, and I'll never, ever forget it, and I thank you. And that's the first accolade in writing that he'd ever sent. And he had a belief that while you were working together, two people had a job to do. And that's where I got that bit about, if I wanted you to do a bad job, I wouldn't have hired you. I expect you to do a good job.
Yeah.
So he didn't think patting somebody in the back every 5 minutes was necessary, because if he didn't like what you were doing, you'd hear about it. And you did. You knew exactly where you stood. And went tucking until 3 o'clock in the morning to get it out, but you'd get it out.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's real true, isn't it? It's, I think, especially in the music industry, people are they're just always so waiting for, oh, you were great, or how great that was, or great, And I think it goes to any business, but if you hire somebody, you're hiring because they're going to do the job. And you don't always have to be, you want to, hey, great show tonight, guys. That was fun. But it seems like everybody wants so much gratification after every single show they do.
Well, unfortunately, especially I found in latter years, if you say to somebody, you're the greatest person I've ever had work with me on the road, they almost believe that.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that the way it sounds, but they almost figure, well, I'll fix you. You don't have me, you have nothing. Well, I'm going to tell you a little secret. One of the things that Tom did teach me was rather unique. And he'd have a meeting with everybody the very first day, and it was very blunt. He'd say, now, you might consider this egotistical or whatever you want to consider, but I'm going to tell it to you exactly how I see it. There's only one person on this road that can't be replaced, and that was him. And he'd tell you that. Yeah. So he said, everybody here can be replaced. So never get in your head that I can't do something without you, because I'll show you in a heartbeat that I certainly can. Yeah. And if you've got a problem with that, you shouldn't be here. So what I've learned from that, because I've made that mistake too by saying, especially I find on occasion, if you're bringing somebody really young into the situation, if they're told that behind the scenes you're excellent and you're wonderful and everything else, that they absorb that real quick. Mm-hmm. It's almost like then they start telling you how wonderful they are. So the next time I get them out there, if somebody else has been with them, they start telling me how wonderful they are. And I say, look, in your mind, you probably are. And in that situation, I don't doubt it a bit. But you give me 10 minutes with you, and I'll tell you how wonderful you are. Everybody, just because you can do something with somebody. The whole unique thing about this business is this, whether it's from the technical side or promoting side or manager, agent side, the whole bit. If you don't have the connection, you've got nothing.
Yeah.
You can work it and fight it all along. You can have a manager you fight with, an agent you fight with, a promoter you fight with, and everything else. Or in my case, right, wrong, or indifferent, I've built everything on longevity. Because after so many years, like for example, we're getting ready to do a red-green tour next year all over North America. And when I get a note that says, I don't care where we go, you just said it, and I don't care what dates we go, you just tell me when to go, you've got a comfort level then.
Yeah.
And you strive for that. I read something on the internet one day. Another promoter agent was saying something to the fact of, I've proven to my acts that I've given them the best they're going to get. And I know as long as I can keep getting them that, they will be as loyal as ever to me. And that's what's wrong with some of the people in the industry. Well, that's great, and I respect that, and I think it's wonderful. However, there's also part B to that. And part B is if your heart and soul is in something, and you believe in somebody, and you work as hard as you can work to get them the best you can get them. If one little bad apple gets in there for some reason that's no fault of anybody else's, I don't call that loyalty if you leave.
Yeah.
The loyalty starts and finishes from day one. And to get loyalty, you have to be, it works both ways. You have to be if it's too one-sided, it's never going to work. Because I've been in these situations, you've been in those situations, and it's constantly a battle.
Yeah.
If it isn't a battle verbally, it's a battle mentally. And one's just as bad as the other. Matter of fact, mentally is worse. So as you age in this thing, and if you manage to survive and go through all this nonsense and abuse and all that other stuff that could happen, you come out of it a better person if the team you've got and the people around you are loyal and good and supportive, and you feel that you can trust everybody. I've got a guy that's working with me in the office that I've known since I've been, 14 years old, probably, at a radio station in Lindsay. And drives back and forth to the office now for 22 years. His name is John Lester. And I know I can trust him with anything that I want in that office and never have to worry about it.
Yeah.
And he knows that I've got his best interests at heart too.
Yeah.
And that means everything. And whether you and I work together for God knows how many years, and we know that we're both out for our best interests.
Yeah.
We don't have to worry about, what's that guy doing to me that I don't? And it works the same with an artist. If an artist gets comfortable with you, you're away.
Yeah.
And I kind of chose the route that I'd like longevity to go. If I make a mistake, listen, I used to have staff meetings every morning. I'd walk in and say, okay, so I want everybody to talk this week about things that went wrong. Now, I'm going to tell you, my list has got 30 things wrong that I've done this week so far. And I'm running this company. And I'm not afraid to say that. And I'm not ashamed of it. Because we make mistakes.
Yeah.
And if you want somebody perfect, you got to go way beyond us. Because I'm not even sure anybody exists that's perfect.
No.
And I think if you're open with some of these people, whether it be an agent or a manager or an artist or the public or technical support people or office people or anybody, that approach is essential, because you need that loyalty to stick with you. Because I don't want any changes in life at the moment as far as the business goes. It's gone to the point now that although we have to bring in people for advice and different marketing strategies or whatever the case happens, to try to stay as current as we can, I don't think all of a sudden saying, let's take on 10 new acts next week because we really need to stay busy and that's what we need to do, because nobody's comfortable in it.
No.
You're not, John's not, I'm not. And for God's sakes, the artist sure in the heck isn't, because here's this guy from Peterborough that promotes Red Green, Stompin Tom, Wilf Carter, Kitty Wells. I mean, what the heck does he know about what we do? Nothing. And I had an agent called me one day, and there was 2 award winners on the Canadian Country Music Awards, and he said, I'm teaming them up. They're the winners. These people have won 7 CCMA awards between them. Would you please do a 7-day tour with them? And I said, I'm not sure. And the guy says, are you crazy? He says, they won CCMA awards. They're big. They're on television.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, we're the guys on television for 36 years. What does that mean? And so he says, so I said, well, here's what I'll do. I'll go through the motions and I'll put together a budget. Okay? And I said, well, because everybody talks budgets today. You got to send the spreadsheets in, and 12 people got to look at them, and an accountant that doesn't know the first thing about the business anyway, but they've got to look at them. Look at them and see, you're right or wrong and where this fits in and the whole bit. So I said, okay, let's go. We'll do this. So I get the budgets all done up. I send them in, and I said, now, as near as I can figure, when it's all said and done, the acts will make $4,000 between them. Now, the agent said, that's wonderful. And I said, why is that wonderful? Well, he says, it's great. They're getting great exposure and the whole bit. And I said, let me just think about this for a minute. These 2 people are the top drawer acts in the country at the moment, according to a bunch of block voting with the CCMA. These guys are going to rule the roost. So let's go out and we'll do this. So I said, now, I'm not going to do this tour. He said, you got to be crazy. He said, do you know the relationship you could build with these 2 acts and how much that would do you great to have these 2 under your belt? And I said, well, I'm going to tell you something. If my only accomplishment in this business is to get these acts each $2,000 each, and each of them have a bus, and each of them have hotel rooms to pay for, they got an agent to pay for, and they got a manager to pay for, that don't make any sense to me.
No.
And he said, you just don't understand it. And I said, well, I probably don't. So when somebody says, why aren't you taking on all these modern country acts? They're the greatest people in the world. You should have them out there. You should be doing it. Why not? I say we're doing each other a big favor. I think it's wonderful what they're doing. I think they can go out there and fill these places up and do great business and have their semis and their managers and their agents and God knows what else they've got. If they can make big money, go do it. I'm all for it. I can't see where I fit into that because I'm not going to make any more money. I mean, go to the people that understand that type of thing. I got a good mutual friend of ours, Tinty Moffat, called me one time. And she said, I got Randy Travis available October the 8th, 9th, and 10th. So Thanksgiving weekend.
Yeah.
I said, God, we've just done a Roy Clark tour together. We've done a Mel Tillis, can get as bad as Mel Tillis tour. And it was great. And I said, I missed the chance to book Randy Travis many years ago when a guy called me up and said, I want $5,000 a day. And we want to do Toronto, Hamilton, and Kitchener. And I called the guy that ran CFGM, and he said, we wouldn't touch that show with a 10-foot pole. Randy Travis won't draw anything. And he said, it'll be an embarrassment to the station and an embarrassment to the people, an embarrassment to Randy. He's a great guy, but there's no way we're... This is when, Forever Renee Man and all that stuff was big time. So the guy called me up. He said, look, if you don't do this, I've got an agent. I got a promoter in the U.S. that does. And Lib Hatcher's giving me 24 hours. Said, you deal with that guy in Canada I've never heard of before. Because he knew me. And he said, but I'm going to give you... I said, gee, how much? And he said... I said, $15,000. God, that's a lot of money. And he says, well, one day you're going to wish that you got involved in this thing. I said, well, the radio station in Toronto says he won't draw nothing. Lesson number 5,000. Never listen to them. So I had to pass. Back in there, they brought him 2 months later. Not only did one show in Toronto, we did two. And Hamilton sold out, Kitchener sold out, the whole bit. So now is my chance now. It's 20 years later, but now I've got a chance to book Randy Travis. So I'm ready. Thanksgiving weekend. Let's do the Saddle Dome in Calgary. Yeah. Let's do the big arena in Saskatoon. And let's do the big arena in Edmonton. Let's go do it all up. Let's set them up for 8,000 capacity. I'm ready to go. This is it. Yeah. I'm going to make it. Big time. So we get the dates on sale and everything. And the big term in the industry is, how did it come out of the box? Yeah. In the old days, you had a box of tickets, and that's literally how they sold them. Yeah. So Tinty called me and got the numbers, and I said, well, we did 180 in Calgary, and we did 175 in Edmonton, and in Saskatoon, we did like 250. And this silence was on the end of the phone, and she said, is that all the ticket outlets? I said, unfortunately, that was a term from 30 years ago. Yes, that's the Ticketmaster number. She says, oh my God, that's horrible. What do you want to do? And I said, well, God, it can't get worse. Yeah. It's got to get better. So we chug along and chug along and chug along and chug along and chug along. So finally, we get one of the dates up to 1,000 and one's up to 900. Now remember, we're working the Saddle Dome in Calgary, for God's sakes, and that place, 14,000 seats. Yeah. So they say, well, we'll curtain it off and it won't look so bad. We only have 7,000 seats. So that's 800 should fit comfortably in there. That'll be great. So I hear this term in the industry called a rebate. Yeah. So I think we were paying them $30,000 a day or something, a lot of money. So I said, I'm going to call Tinty. We're going to get a rebate. Well, as it turns out, Lib Hatcher's sick at this point, or not feeling well, and she can't come to Canada. So she wants to cancel the dates anyway. Yeah. Well, I go add up all the expenses for the advertising, the theater, the arena rentals, the staff, the sound and lights and everything that I've got to now do. I've got to I've committed to it. Yeah. It came to $38,000. If I canceled the dates, it was going to cost me $40,000. Because I'd already had this money out. Yeah. So I said, Tinty, well, that doesn't make any sense to me. I just want to get a rebate. She said, well, they don't want to do a rebate. And I said, of all the agents and promoters that have come to this country that have not paid their bill and always got rebates, they're not going to rebate anything? That's crazy. Yeah. She says, well, but what they'll do is the next time they go to those markets, they're your dates. I said, God, I don't want to lose $40,000. That's crazy. Yeah. Well, as it turns out, two of the arenas, I talked to them, give them the story. I said, I don't really want to cancel this thing. I only had 1,000 people. And Saskatoon and Edmonton called me up and said, look, there's no cost for here at all. Zero. Nothing. So that was $8,000. Yeah. So now we're down to 30. So I thought, look, I've wanted to do this all my life. We were flying with all kinds of tour dates anyway. I've got a chance to get the dates back whenever he comes back up again. So that's, Anyway, we did the dates, and he was wonderful, and they're great, and the whole bit. But it looked a little sparse in some of these places, that many people. Yeah. But he thanked me and said how much respect he had for me for doing the dates and all that stuff. So a couple of years later, of course, it's time to do more dates. Yeah. I'm reading on the internet that he's doing all these dates in Western Canada, and I thought, that's kind of strange. The old saying, what about me? Yeah. So I call up Tinty, and she says, well, I hate to tell you this, but he's not with our agency anymore. He's with somebody else, and they've sold the dates to another agent. And I said, well, what the heck does the agent have to do with it? I mean, that was then. She says, well, sorry, it's,
That's the way it goes.
she meant well, it wasn't her fault, but
No.
it was just, so when somebody says to me, let's go out and I've had the Charlie MacNeil thing, Randy Travis, and then Brad Jones and I did a date with a group that the guy was going out with Sonny Bono's wife after
Sure.
she died. No, when he died and got in that accident, his ex-wife, and she was anyway. I can't think of the name of this group, but they were excellent group, and they did very, very well. And so Brad called me and says, Les Edwards, I got the #1 song this week in country radio. Let's do the Peterborough Arena with them. So okay, let's go do it. So here we are. We've got they're still going too. I can't remember the heck their name is. But anyway, the drummer worked on a Kitty Wells tour with us once, so I remember who they were. But anyway, they were something like Lone Star, but it wasn't them, and it was something similar to them. So we go out on the road and we bring them into Peterborough, and we get everything all set to go. And 300 people in that arena is all we had. So I said, from now on, I'm not touching it. If it's got too many buses or a semi, I'm not touching it.
Yeah.
So, and I think it gets back to just, in your mind you want to do that, but you shouldn't. If you don't really know what you're doing, and obviously I didn't, we shouldn't have done it. And that's just, it's learning not to do it. Sometimes it's better to pass on more things and take them.
Yeah, it's that, and that's the smart play. It's knowing what not to take and knowing what to take.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's over the years it's been quite I mean, if I believed everything I read about what I do, I probably would be in big trouble, because the old saying goes that, if you feed something to somebody and they print it and you believe it, then you're in big trouble as they are. Yeah. So we used to send all our box office reports into Polestar magazine, and, it would come out and they'd say, well, they'd write you this note and say, you're in the top 100 promoters around the world. And you think, my God, that's wonderful. And then the phone would ring from all these acts that want you to book them. You didn't want to book in the first place. Yeah. And then SoCan would call you because you missed a date on this one or somebody else. And I got thinking, you know what? Sometimes it's better to say nothing. Just sit there in little old Peterborough. I'm there for a reason. I love it there. But we didn't have to go downtown Chicago, downtown Toronto.
Yeah.
You can do everything you want to do. And sometimes when an artist is coming up and they realize you're not paying $3,000 a square foot for rent downtown Toronto or whatever it is, that they stand a chance to make money too. Better money. I read a book not long ago that Anne Murray had written, and her manager just passed away, who I had a lot of respect for, Leonard Rambo, one of the best. He was great. I used to go listen to him do seminars and stuff, and I got a lot from him. But one of the points she made in this book was that she could never figure out, and Frank Mills had told me this story too, that they'd have these lavish parties after these shows were done. Yeah. Dom Perignon champagne, the media would all be there, all these people from the record company and all this sort of stuff. And she said, I never knew who paid for all that stuff. And she said, I'm reading through all this stuff. And she says, I paid for it. And I thought to myself, of all the years I've seen these riders with all this stuff in it, and all these parties that have taken place, if any advice or anything could go to anybody today, just remember that's all money. It's got to come from somewhere.
Yeah. So
if you're content that you should have pheasant under glass and the best wines and champagnes and alcohol on the road, a lady from Shipshewana, Indiana, really nailed it good one night. She says, we're in an Amish community there doing a red-green date. And she says, now, what are you doing here with riders with alcohol? She says, why would I spend money on something that's going to make an artist be that much less coherent and not be able to do their job right? She says, that don't make sense to us here. And I said, I don't particularly care what anybody does. I mean, God worked with Ray Price. He'd be stoned to the hilt before he got on the stage, but the show was good. Yeah. And how he got there was really irrelevant to me, but I didn't buy the pot for him, so I couldn't care what he did. Yeah. But these particular things especially cost a lot of money. And I guess when you're riding high, you think nothing of it. Frank Mills tells me that story. When you're out there filling the places up and you're packing them in, you're having these great parties afterwards, and then you find out at the end of the tour you're writing them a check, there's something wrong with that.
Yeah.
And I say, well, I'm surprised. I see some of this stuff going on today too, but I say to myself, you know what? We understand what we do, and we do it to the best of our ability. They understand what they do, and they do it to the best of their ability. If we're winning and they're winning, I don't care what they do.
Yeah.
And they probably don't care what we do.
Yeah.
So I was kind of flattered. I was going to tell you this. Last week I opened up the Peterborough paper on Friday, and I seen an ad for a tribute show in there. And I looked at that ad and I thought, God, that looks familiar. And it was done exactly the same size, same inches, same words, same everything that we do our ads with. And I got thinking, I don't know whether I should take that as a slight or a compliment. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to take it as a compliment. Because if somebody duplicates what you do, you know you're doing it right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's the whole deal.
Well, I think we could talk forever, and it's been 2.5.
Oh boy.
I think let's call this part 1.
Oh boy.
And I know we're touring a lot this fall. Why don't we take another night during the fall run? And there's a whole whack of stuff I'd love to get to and talk about touring nowadays compared to what it was like touring years ago with Tom and Katie Wells and all those acts. I know because it's quite different than. There's a lot of similarities, but there's a lot of things that are quite different, and I think there'd be lots of great things we could speak about then too.
Oh, you bet. Yeah, we got lots of red green stuff to tell and all.
Oh,
that
I know.
Sort of stuff.
We haven't even touched Charley Pride and Red Green
and
I know. A bunch of people. So
yeah, absolutely.
It's been fascinating, and I think this was a great learn for a lot of people, and I think they'll really enjoy listening to from the beginning up until now, and I look forward to the next one as well.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Brian, and don't forget to check out the first 2 podcasts we have out, and we've got lots of listeners coming and lots of great comments, and check us out on iTunes In Session with Darren Walters, also the www.darrenwalterspodcast.com. And don't forget to subscribe and leave comments, and reach out to myself on Instagram and Facebook. And you can find Brian as well. What's the best way to people to reach out to you if they want it through Facebook? Is it a good idea?
Yeah, I'm on Facebook, or you can go. We got Rocklands on Facebook. I'm on Facebook, and then of course rocklandsentertainment.com. See how old I am, and I'm still on social media, believe it or not.
I know, it's great. I love it. All right, we'll talk to everyone soon. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.